in the Duchy of Cassium, and all those present were engaged in casual conversation. Leandro looked at his sister and said that she should eat the carrots. Lena said that she didn't want to. Ethel, gritting her teeth, looked at all this. Leandro said she needed to eat well. Lena said she didn't like it and she wouldn't die if she didn't eat it. The young man looked at his sister and asked with a smile why she didn't like to eat carrots. The Duke shouted and said that no one had the right to force his daughter to eat something she did not like. The Duke told the servants that anyone involved in putting his daughter's unloved dishes on the table could say goodbye to their jobs. The servants trembled with fear as they looked at their master. Lena shouted to her father to calm down. With tears in her eyes, she asked her father how he could fire someone for such an offense. She said that he was not like that at all. Clearing his throat, the Duke said that this time he would ignore everything that had happened. The brothers were amazed by their sister. They wondered how she could be as innocent as a little rabbit. Ethel was furious, wondering what this had to do with a 20-year-old girl. Leandro noticed that his wife had a strange aura about her. He looked at his wife in surprise and asked if she was uncomfortable. Ethel said that everything was fine. She just had no appetite, but she couldn't directly say that she had lost her appetite because of them. The young man smiled and told his sister to eat the carrots and he would give her something. Leandro said that he would also give her something. Lena asked why they wanted to give her gifts if today was an ordinary day. The young man approached his brother and asked what about a gift, since his wife must be upset. Ethel looked at her husband and asked if he really had prepared a gift for her. Leandro looked at his wife in surprise and asked what kind of gift they were talking about since today was an ordinary day. The young lady looked at her husband in surprise and said that today was their wedding anniversary. Today was exactly 2 years since their wedding. Leandro was confused because he forgot. The brother and sister looked at their brother with a grin and said that he was a worthless husband since he forgot about such a day. The Duke sighed heavily and said that if you start a family, you need to take care of it. The young lady was furious. She didn't understand why they were all behaving like this. The young man sighed heavily and said that it was indeed not his fault since he had forgotten about the anniversary. The young lady was furious, wondering if it was so difficult for him to apologize to her. Leandro asked if there was a law requiring a husband to give a gift to his wife on their wedding anniversary. The young lady was very angry. She previously thought that she was very lucky when she realized that she got into the novel. She had another opportunity given to her after a car accident. She got into her favorite novel, Lena, that she died after the terrible life she had to endure. The Duke's second son is Laheim. The Duke's eldest son is Leandro. The Grand Patriarch is Archduke Cassius. Lena was reborn and was the daughter of the Duke's family. As the youngest in the family, she received a lot of love and affection from them. Ethel found it amusing to watch the men pamper their Lena, but what she now saw was very different from what she had read. Ethel Wallace is the beautiful wife of Lena Leandro's older brother, one of the most minor supporting characters who appears very often. The lady was very happy Leandro was her favorite character and now she was his wife. A beautiful-looking and simply perfect man who resembles a duke in both ability and appearance. She was very glad to be his wife even though it was a marriage of convenience. At least she was a member of the ducal family. She knew there was no better place to watch the plot. That's what she thought before, but now she realized that this was just a terrible situation. Leandro said that an anniversary is an event that is time to celebrate together, but his wife also did not prepare a gift for him. The young lady was very much taken aback, for when she read the novel she did not look at it from Ethel's point of view. He left her alone on their honeymoon and had to deliver her first anniversary gift through an assistant. She said with a smile that today was her birthday because she wanted to spend time with him, but the young man gave his wife a cold look and said that he was very busy. The young lady smiled and asked if he would like to take a short walk with her. Leandro looked at his wife with anger and said that he was going for a walk with his sister. The young lady was puzzled because she was always left alone. The young lady was shocked, as she never thought that he would treat her like a nobody. Leandro said with a grin that for that reason it wasn't his fault. Moments later, a gift flew straight into his face. Everyone present was in shock. They froze in bewilderment as they did not expect such a thing. Having thrown the gift to the young lady, she stood for some time and looked angrily at her husband. The young man was perplexed and did not understand what had just happened. Ethel screamed furiously at her husband that she wanted them to get a divorce. Turning around, the young lady told her husband that she wanted to divorce him as soon as possible. Leandro was taken aback. He didn't understand what kind of divorce they were talking about. The Duke looked at the young lady in surprise and asked if she was serious about divorce. Without looking at her relatives, she said goodbye to them and the maids rushed after her. She knew that even if she left, she couldn't forget about herself. She didn't want to leave empty-handed. Sometime later, Leandro entered the room and called his wife. He looked at his wife in bewilderment and asked if she was serious about divorce. Ethel said that she had made herself more than clear. Leandro asked why she was demanding a divorce from him. He blocked her way. The young lady said that she needed to go out. He said it was his fault that he forgot about their anniversary. She asked him who said that was the only reason. The young man sighed heavily and said that he agreed that they were not an ideal couple, but this was a marriage of convenience. Ethel said that she was not demanding it because she did not know about it. He asked in bewilderment what the reason was then. A moment later, he told her to look to the side because there was a dress there. Leandro said that every time she puts on the dress, he remembers their wedding and all the good things. The young lady looked at it and said it was not good. The young man looked at her in bewilderment. Ethel said she didn't like the dress at all, and it wasn't her dress at all. A couple of months before the wedding, you had a dress fitting in the Duchy. Without taking his eyes off the book, the young man told Ethel that the dress looked good on her. The madam looked at the young lady and asked which dress she would like to try on next. Ethel's mother and father said that she should not under any circumstances miss out on such an eligible bachelor as the Duke. Ethel's brother told his sister that she was destined to become a duchess. Ethel knew that her relatives did not care much about her, nor did they think much about her marriage. But still, she was glad that she had the chance to choose the most beautiful dress in a popular store. Lena rushed into the room and called her brother with a smile on her face. The young man asked what happened. Lena said that she wanted to watch her sister try on wedding dresses. When the young lady read this novel, she really wanted to have a family like theirs. She knew that after the wedding she would become part of this family. All her dreams were coming true. Lena rushed to the wedding dress and called her brother with a smile on her face. Looking at her brother, she slyly asked if she could try it on at least once. Ethel was puzzled as she did not expect such a thing. Lena said that if her sister did not mind. Lena smiled and said shyly that this dress looked very cute. Ethel knew that the young lady could be understood since she had reconciled wedding dresses herself in the past. Leandro asked in surprise why she wanted to try it on. Ethel told the young lady that nothing would happen if she just tried it on. Leandro sighed heavily and said that she could do whatever she wanted. Lena smiled because she was happy. Leandro and the Duke entered the room. Leandro asked his brother where their sister was. The Duke said they were going to have a cup of tea together, but they were told she was somewhere here. Ethel was puzzled because Lena decided to try on her dress, but they did not expect to see Ethel in her own room. A moment later, the young lady came out and asked with a smile what they thought of the dress. Everyone froze as they were in shock. They didn't expect that the dress would suit her so well. The young lady asked with a smile if the dress suited her. She was expecting praise. Leandro asked why she was wearing a wedding dress. Lena said that she just wanted to try it on. The Duke said it seemed like only yesterday that she had promised her daddy to marry him when she grew up. Ethel wondered if it was so bad in the novel. Leandro looked at everyone and asked with fury what they were doing. Ethel thought that at least one person was taking everything adequately. Leandro said that his sister said that she would marry him. Ethel was shocked by what she heard, as she knew he was supposed to be her husband. Lena told them to stop and also asked what good was in telling such stories from the past. Lena said she was going to try on some other dresses, so she asked them to stay and look. The young lady slowly and happily tried on different types of dresses. The Duke and his brothers were simply delighted, but Ethel was shocked by everything that was happening. The Duke asked his daughter if she wanted to go to tea. She agreed. Leandro told his brother to work harder. The young lady, in turn, was very glad that they left as she was very tired. Leandro looked at Ethel and asked what about that dress since Lena looked beautiful in it. Leandro said that she remembered trying it on. Ethel asked furiously what she was trying on. He said puzzled that he was sure she had tried it on. Ethel said she had not worn it. She said furiously that it was not her but his sister. Leandro said he would never do something so stupid. He said it was his wife who made a mistake. Ethel asked him if he thought she was stupid and couldn't tell the difference between something she had never worn. He looked at her and said that perhaps she had made up a story that didn't exist. Leandro said that she just wanted to blame him. The young lady froze in bewilderment. She was in shock. She asked if he was saying that she was lying, and the young man said that he had not said that. He said that despite all the similarities between his wife and sister, he simply could not be mistaken. She was in shock. He looked at her in surprise and asked why she hadn't answered him then. He asked her if what she was saying wasn't offensive. She asked if he meant what she had said at dinner that night. He asked her why she was suddenly asking such questions. For a moment he thought he said that he asked about a gift from his wife and she asked for a divorce. She looked at him and asked what she had said before. He thought for a moment, as he didn't remember what she said. Looking at him, she said that this was her position in this house. Estelle said that she remains the same after marriage. She asked him what she was like before marriage. She asked if he could point out the inconsistencies. She thought when he suggested what Lena was wearing, Estelle knew that her family had not yet recognized her, and she should not rush as they would become closer in small steps. But she saw that there was never enough room for her in their hearts. Leandro sighed heavily and said that his family was unusually close-knit. Ethel said that since she was not close to them, then she should just leave. He grabbed her by the shoulder, but she pushed him away and hit him. She said that she would prepare the divorce papers and send them as soon as possible, so that all he would have to do was sign them. Leandro, he shouted at his wife to stop. He wanted to talk, but she didn't listen. She said that she had heard enough of his nonsense. He asked in surprise what she had just said. Turning around, she said furiously that he was a nobody. She went down and saw the servants. Lena and Leheim approached their daughter-in-law in bewilderment. They did not believe that she would really divorce their brother. The Duke looked at the young lady and said that she did not have to do that. But the young lady in turn did not listen to anyone and slowly left the estate. The young lady plopped down on the bed with a smile. She was very happy. She didn't pack her luggage very well, but she still preferred comfort. She knew that she could think about the little things later, since first she needed to get a divorce. Leheim looked at his brother and asked if he would really leave everything as it was now. Leandro looked at his brother in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Leheim said that he was talking about his daughter-in-law. Now Leandro said that she would return soon. The young man asked his brother in surprise what he was talking about, since she said that she wanted to divorce him. Leandro said that his wife, a wise woman, got angry and started talking about divorce. Leandro said that their marriage would not end just like that, since they did not have any feelings for each other from the very beginning. Leandro said that Ethel would definitely be back soon. Leheim asked if he was sure about that. Leandro smiled and said that Lena said that her brother would be able to survive. Leheim said, puzzled, that he understood his brother. He knew that at the perfect time, their sister would give useful information. She could say something that caught her interlocutor off guard, and surprisingly, everything she said turned out to be true. Leandro sighed heavily and said that he would never allow a divorce. The butler knocked on the door and asked the young gentleman if he had woken up like that, but he did not have time to finish speaking. The butler shouted after the gentleman, since he did not have time to finish what he wanted. The butler shouted for him to wait for him. The young man knew that, of course, after everything that had happened, his wife had returned to him. Opening the door, he saw the postman. The young man was surprised and did not understand why his wife was not there. He looked at the young man in surprise and asked who he was. The young man said that the young lady asked him to give him an envelope with documents. Opening the envelope, he saw a divorce agreement. Leandro was shocked and confused. Ethel made an appointment with him, and he came. Leandro was very angry. He saw his wife and shouted to her. She was surprised that he appeared right in front of her. The young man angrily asked why she had sent him these documents. She asked, surprised, if he thought she had sent the divorce papers for fun. He looked at her and asked if she really wanted to leave him. He asked how she could do this to him, as he was very worried about his wife leaving. She sighed heavily and asked who had asked him to worry about her. He came closer to her and shouted. She looked at him in surprise and also shouted. The young man was confused. He stood and looked at her in shock. She sighed heavily, as he seemed to think that he was the only one who could scream. He sighed heavily and said that after she left, he had thought about many things. Ethel said that before starting this monologue, he should still sign the documents. Leandro was shocked. He said that he did not understand how she could behave like that. She looked at him angrily and said that it was because she didn't care about his apologies. She wondered if she should pretend to be the victim in this situation. She said she wanted to set the record straight because she didn't want to see his face anymore. Looking at his wife, he said with a grin that the papers had been torn by accident. He said that since this had happened, they could talk calmly. She smiled and said that she understood. She said that she had prepared more than one set of documents, and he in turn tore them up. He looked at her and said that it didn't matter how many documents she had prepared. Leandro said he had no desire to divorce her. She sighed heavily and said that then they had no choice but to go to court. He said she couldn't take him to court. He asked if she thought she could remove his family. Ethel said she thought she could and shouted out loud that she wanted him to divorce her. Passers-by were shocked as they heard the name of one of the Cassiuses. Leandro was very angry that his wife shouted she knew that she only needed time for the rumors to spread. She was not at all opposed to losing her dignity during a dirty fight. She came closer to him and said with a smirk that she wanted to know who would be the first to give in. She understood that she simply had no other option except going to court. In her mind, she asked herself the same questions she would have been asked in court. She knew she might be asked if he had stopped funding for a few months. She knew that he gave her 5,000 gold coins monthly for personal expenses. She didn't want to admit it, but at first glance her husband was a worthy husband. There was one thing that could be grounds for divorce, but she wasn't ready to discuss it with a lawyer yet. Leandro ran to his wife and said that he was not very good at expressing his emotions, but he loved her. He was puzzled and didn't know how things had come to this. The young lady was confused and did not understand why he was so persistent. Ethel asked if he was sure she would believe his words. She knew he didn't love her. He screamed that it wasn't true. He said that he married her for love and does not want to break up because he still loves her. He said that there were families with a higher status than hers, but he still chose her as his wife. She asked if he thought she didn't know why he chose her. She mentioned the abandoned mines. Ethel said that Lena wanted to get her family's abandoned mines, so he married her. They had once been mined, but the quality of the ore began to decline, and her family abandoned them. But this little place would become a duck that laid golden eggs. She knew about it because she read the novel, and Lena knew because she went back in time. Leandro was in shock. The young man did not understand how his wife could find out about something like this. He was in shock and did not know what to say. She looked at him and said that he had let it slip when he was drunk. He was taken aback. She said that it was exactly like that, and he didn't even remember it, but of course she knew it was a lie. Ethel said he had let it slip to her that he had married her because he wanted his sister to have a good life. He said that initially everything was like that, but after their first meeting, he fell in love with her. Ethel asked why he had changed his attitude after their wedding. She said angrily that he had left her alone, and Leandro hesitated, not knowing what to answer. She said it was the most lie she had ever heard in her life, and Ethel asked if she looked like a fool. He grabbed her hand and asked for a chance to explain everything to her. She asked furiously if he was really so upset that he would no longer be able to have Shakti. The young lady was furious. She knew they would get nothing. All the mines were her property. She said that it would be better for her father to give the mines to her. She said it would be a huge waste to lose the mines when new technologies were coming along. There are still stones in this mine, but there is one problem: they were located deep underground. Sometimes the mines became the topic of their conversations, but she always apologized for the time it took to deliver the documents. She said with a smile that she still hadn't received anything from her parents. She also said that it seemed that the documents were lost due to an accident during their delivery. She also said that the accountant responsible for her family's finances had collapsed from exhaustion. The family really wanted to get her mines. Since these mines were her dowry, she was obliged to give them to them. She knew she needed to complete the divorce process as quickly as possible. The young lady went to the Forest of Travelers, which was located on the outskirts of the territory. A moment later, the bird flew into the sky and startled the young lady. A few minutes later, she clearly heard some noise. Looking into the distance, she saw the main villain of this novel. She knew that he would get in Lena's way later. Marquis Terence Freeheden is a high-ranking nobleman who actually hid his identity. Ethel was shocked when she saw him. She knew that he would soon gain great power. She knew about him, but she didn't fully believe that their meeting would happen so soon. She didn't know what to do. Ethel thought she should say she had lost her memory. She knew she couldn't miss this opportunity. She knew he couldn't live his whole life in a house where she was ignored. A moment later, she heard the Marquis's voice, and the young lady became very frightened and wary. The Marquis said that if a man does not want to say goodbye to life, it is better to show himself, and he drew his sword in anger. A moment later, there was a loud crash, and opening her eyes, she was taken aback as she saw that a tree near her had been split. The man attacked the Marquis with fury, puzzled that he had been discovered. The Marquise, in turn, deftly turned away and dealt the man several blows. The Marquis looked at the mercenary with disdain and asked if this was all he could do. The Marquis sighed heavily as he wondered where they recruited such killers. The young lady was in shock. She was very worried and afraid. She thought that now was not the best situation for them to meet. The young lady thought that she might meet him next time. Trembling with fear, the young lady did not notice how she stumbled and slowly fell from the cliff. She was confused and didn't understand who was holding her so tightly. Opening her eyes, she saw the Marquis in front of her. The young lady was a little puzzled as she noticed that he was indeed attractive up close. She was in shock, didn't understand where he came from, but in a hurry, she jumped down and thanked him for saving her. The young man smiled and asked what the young lady was doing in such an inappropriate place for her. She looked puzzled and said that she seemed to have chosen the wrong path, and he asked why she had come to the forest. He said that this place is far from the road and in fact it is on the opposite side. The young lady was in shock. She realized that she had probably overdone it and that she could be found out. She was confused as she had no idea at all how to answer his questions. A moment later, she said that she had come here on an errand to look around and had gotten lost. He smiled and asked if she could tell him about the assignment. She timidly said that it was personal. He said that the only thing in the area was wandering mercenaries. The young lady realized that he suspected her. She knew that she had to get out of this quickly. He looked at her menacingly and said he wondered if she knew there was someone there. She said with a smile that she would tell him everything now. She said that due to personal circumstances, of course, she had to share with her savior. She said she would like to hire a group of mercenaries to protect her or escort her. She said she asked her husband for a divorce, but he said it would never happen. Ethel said she was afraid he would come for her, even if she left the house. He said he understood everything. The Marquis said that it seems she is from the aristocracy. He said that she could ask for a personal knight from the order. She said she couldn't afford it. The young man asked for forgiveness, as he didn't know about her situation. She smiled and said that it was she who had suddenly disturbed him, and said that it was time for her to go. Walking along the path, she stumbled, looked at the tree in surprise. She remembered where it came from. The young lady glanced at him sideways and said that his skills were simply superb. He smiled and said that she wouldn't regret hiring him. The young lady was shocked. She didn't understand what he was talking about. He came closer to her and said with a smile that he could become her companion. She was shocked by such a statement. He smiled and said that he was a traveling mercenary and was just looking for someone who would give him work. She said she was having trouble getting paid. Now he smiled and said he would accept the minimum wage. Ethel knew that this was a very good opportunity to get closer to him and exchange information. She agreed and said with a smile that she accepted his application. The Marquis was glad he said that she could safely call him Thea. She was surprised because unexpectedly for her, the main villain became her bodyguard. She knew that if she mentioned her husband's last name, he would be wary, and for this reason she introduced herself as she was called before marriage. She knew that her family was far from active, so she could call herself by her maiden name. The Marquis said that she could call him by his first name since he had no surnames and was born into a humble family. She looked at him with a smile, for he lied as he breathed, and not a muscle even twitched. The young lady walked beside him and looked at him intently, wondering what she was thinking about. He was very handsome. She knew that if only you were new or were an illustration, she would choose him. He asked her where she was staying, as she had previously said that she had moved out of her husband's place. She said that she was currently staying at a hotel. Tay said that he should also stay at the same hotel. She said that in addition to paying for accommodation, she would hire room service once a week. He said he could take care of it himself, and she asked in surprise if he had money for it. He cleared his throat and said he would accept her kindness. She knew he would get into trouble if he forgot his role as a poor mercenary. She knew that he couldn't live with debts, that was his character, and he would have to pay for it later. The young man frowned, looking at the bed. He sighed heavily and said that he was still a strange girl. He wanted to see more of her worried face. He didn't understand why he caught her. He knew it was not like him, and he got into trouble again. The Marquis thought that he should send a message after all. He wrote that he would be delayed for a while. He knew that since it was his job, he had to do it well. The young lady in turn slept peacefully in her hotel room. The young man in turn was quietly dozing in the chair. He was ready. A young lady came into the shop and said she needed some medicinal herbs for tea. The young lady noticed that the Marquis had a headache. The Marquise's greatest weakness is headaches, a curse placed on the royal family in exchange for a portion of the divine power. The imperial family can control mana without any problems, but they suffer from the side effects. The strength of pain is directly proportional to the amount of mana. There are those who have received the greatest power in history. The two sons of the current emperor also did not escape this fate, the main male character of the novel, and his beloved Lena's crown prince Michael, and the emperor's illegitimate son Terence. Terence was the firstborn born the son of the Marchioness of Molo, but the emperor's brother died and the second prince, the current emperor, became the heir. The Marquise disappeared. The emperor was saddened by the news that his bride had run away with the coachman with whom she was in love, and he married the duke's daughter. The Marquise seemed to have forgotten about his daughter after her death, until one day she appeared with her son in her arms. According to her daughter, she was kidnapped on the orders of the emperor and the duke, but her kidnappers remained unpunished. She couldn't find a place for herself since she was already pregnant at the time of the abduction. He had imperial blood in him, but he was not recognized. Otherwise, he would have been the man who took the place of the crown prince. But in the end, because of a conspiracy, he was deprived of everything, and this man, Terence Freeheiden, Ethel, he cannot call the emperor father, but he is also under threat from the duke. One of the things that pushed him over the edge was a headache. Due to the increasing pain, he became addicted to a drug called Devil's Claw. The crown princess, who also had headaches, was Lena. The young lady was furious because the main characters were so fond of choosing favorites. Some are blessed with love and the role of crown prince, while others suffer the humiliation of being born out of wedlock. He ended up passing out due to the side effects of the drug. The young lady thanked the seller for the herbs. She knew that a little tea would give the Marquis strength. She knew that this drug could ease the suffering. She knew that in the future, Lena would be the first to discover its effect, but she still knew that now she would be the first. At first, she wanted to use the Marquis's powers to get a divorce and leave the empire. But looking at him, she understood that now she could not do this to him. She understood that he was a good person. She smiled and asked if he wanted to go to the next place. She knew that as long as he had the medicinal tea, he would not become addicted. He asked her why she needed holy water. She said that she wanted to cook something. She said that she needed water for tea. The Marquis continued the conversation, but suddenly heard something. He grabbed her hand and pulled her in the other direction. The young lady asked him what he was doing and told him to tell her immediately what this was all for. He whispered softly in her ear to keep her quiet. The young lady was very frightened and embarrassed because he was very close. A moment later, she saw a familiar face. The young lady was surprised, as it was Tara. Ethel wondered if she had been following her. A moment later, the Marquis drew his sword and attacked the girl. Tara fought back. A moment later, the Marquis had her pinned down and thrown to the ground, asking why she was following them. She screamed and called the lady for help. The Marquis looked at the young lady in surprise and asked if she knew her. Ethel said she knew her, because she was a maid in her husband's house. Tara said in a trembling voice that she saw the lady and followed her because she had something to say. Ethel said that if it were true, she would not have been stalking her secretly. Ethel asked if Lena had ordered it. Tara asked in surprise why her mistress would do that. Ethel told her that she knew that she had followed her around many times looking for her weaknesses and trying to control her. Tara is Lena's loyal dog. Her family was given a piece of land in exchange for unconditional loyalty. But all this turned out to be a trap set by their owners, which led to a sad outcome. Unfortunately, that same night, her family lost their home. Tara, who lost her entire family, later managed to get even with the constant bullying. But she was executed on charges of murdering an aristocrat in Lena's first life. After returning, Lena found Tara, whom she had never met before, and offered her help in carrying out her revenge. Tara's obsession and ability to gather information was amazing. Tay held the knife to Tara's throat and asked his mistress if he should deal with her. The young lady looked at her guard and told him to leave her alone with Tara. The Marquis said that he would move far enough away so as not to hear their conversation. Tara looked in surprise at the young lady who was coming closer and closer to her. The young lady told her that if she joined forces with her, she would tell her where the target of her revenge, the Viscount, was. Tara was shocked. She didn't know how the lady found out about this. Ethel said it was a secret. Ethel asked the maid how her mistress knew everything if she was not God. Tara said that even if she had the same skills as her lady, it didn't matter since she was not her benefactor. Tara said that when the time came, her mistress would tell her everything Ethel said that she thought the lady was lying to her. Tara glared at the lady and told her to shut up. Ethel asked if Tara wasn't interested in what information she had. Tara looked at the young lady and asked what she wanted from her. Ethel was glad because she succeeded. Ethel told Tara to tell Lena what she was about to say. Tara asked in surprise, was that all, Ethel, that was a reasonable demand? The maid asked if she would give her this information in return. Ethel said that she would tell her in 2 months. The young lady sighed heavily as she thought she would be less frightening. Lena didn't intentionally hide information. She only knew Altima's secret Chilean identity. It seems that in this life she also constantly looked through newspapers. From this point of view, one gets caught wins. The young lady wanted Tara to suspect Lena until she divorced her husband. The Marquis looked at the young lady and asked if the conversation had gone well. He said she looked as if she had forgotten about him. Ethel asked if they could hear what they were talking about. He said that he did not hear anything because he had to follow the orders of his employer. She said that it looked like she needed to invite her trusty bodyguard to dinner. She said that it was time for them to go to the hotel. Lena greeted her maid with a smile and asked her if everything went well. Tara looked at the lady and dryly replied that everything was fine. Lena looked at the maids and said that they could be free. The maids did not listen to her and said that she should still try on just one outfit. She said she needed to talk to Tara alone. She asked if they could step outside for a minute. The maids were shocked they couldn't take their eyes off her because she was very cute. Lena said she was grateful that they loved her, but sometimes it was tiring. Tara knew she could tell them that. Lena looked at the maid and asked, what about her sister? Tara said she went for a walk and also went shopping, and she laughed a lot. Lena said that as expected, she was not interested in divorce. Tara listened to everything Lena said but did not respond. Lena said that her older brother drinks and talks about how he loves her sister. Tara asked her if she was really going to leave the mines to the young lady for now. The young lady said that it turns out that way, and moreover, the price will increase later. Tara said she would continue to watch the young mistress. Lena said that was enough. Lena told the maid to return to her main job. Tara looked at Lena intently. The young lady and the Marquis were having a pleasant time. She smiled looking at him and asked if he liked the aroma of tea. While drinking tea, the Marquis said with a smile that the aroma was good, but the taste was like medicine. She asked in surprise if that was all he could say, since he had been drinking this tea for 3 days. She asked if he felt better or if his sleep had improved. He said that herbal tea is not a medicine, and it is difficult to notice any change. She knew that if she asked about the headaches, his identity would be revealed. She wondered if she had mixed the ingredients incorrectly. A moment later, the young lady looked at her companion in surprise, for she saw that he had fallen asleep. In her head, she was turning over the plot of this story. She thought for a moment because she realized that this was very good and this was her chance. As she thought the composition was perfect, her ability to see the original plot. She can reread the story again no matter where and when it happens. It is very convenient. But it takes a lot of energy, so she can only use this skill twice a day. She remembered that yesterday the Marquis had also unexpectedly fallen asleep in front of her. He asked if the bed in her room was uncomfortable. She was confused because she had never used it for its intended purpose. He sighed heavily and said that as he thought the rooms were too cheap for a noblewoman. A moment later he moved closer to her and called out to her. The young lady recoiled and said that he was right, that she was tired. He smiled and said that he would walk her to her room and that they would take a walk at the same time. The young lady thanked him with a smile. The more she got to know him, the better person he seemed. Sometime later, walking down the street, they were met by a man who almost called Mark by his title. The Marquis said that it seemed that this mercenary had some business with him. The young lady said that he could take his time. She would go ahead. A moment later, they looked to the side in surprise as they heard a noise. They saw the carriage of the Cassius family. The young lady looked in surprise at Lena, who threw herself into her arms. Sometime later, the young lady and Lena were sitting in a cafe and talking. Ethel hoped that Lena would not realize that Thea had come with her. Ethel looked at Lena and asked what she wanted. The knight angrily told Ethel that she was being rude to the lady who had come to see her. The young lady was furious because the knight addressed her only by name. Lena told her knight not to be rude to her sister. Lena told him that this was an order and he had to ask for forgiveness. He gritted his teeth and asked for forgiveness. Lena told him to apologize properly. Ethel looked at them and told them to stop as she was not a little girl anymore. She also looked at Lena and said that she no longer needed to call her sister. Lena asked her what she was talking about. Lena said that she came to apologize in place of her older brother, even if this all happened because of the mines. It's not the end yet. Lena said she didn't know how to say it correctly, but she had a good feeling. She said that one day she decided to buy porcelain, and after some research, she decided to invest, which brought her great success. Lena said that it seemed like sister didn't believe her, and at first her family also took it as a joke. Ethel knew you had the original story, and in the end everyone believed it easily. Lena said that she had a premonition that in the future these mines would bring success. She said that her brother came to them to buy the mines but fell in love with his sister at first sight. She's not a bad person, but she can't even tell the difference between a lie and the truth when it's necessary. Lena said that when Ethel first came to their house, she liked her even then. Lena said she liked it very much. Ethel asked if she could keep the mine for herself. Lena looked at her in surprise. Ethel said that she had a bad time because of that question. But she is very glad that she received permission from Lena to keep the mines for herself. Ethel asked if since it was not so important she could return them to their parents. Lena screamed loudly for her sister to calm down. She also said that she brought her gifts. Lena said that she should still think about the mines since her brother thought differently and the family needed to maintain its reputation. Ethel asked in surprise since when the Cassius family was worried about something like this. Lena, not listening to her, told her to open the gift first. Ethel thought she seemed unwilling to believe that she liked her only because of the importance of the mines. Lena smiled and said that she didn't know which she would like more, so she bought everything. Ethel was a little puzzled as the gift looked very expensive. Ethel knew that Lena often used these kinds of gifts. Lena smiled and said that they could try on this gift now. She said with a smile that it would look lovely on her. Ethel said that she did not want to try it on because it would not fit her. The young lady was shocked by such a refusal. Ethel looked at the young lady and asked if she wanted to show the rest of the gifts. The knight in turn was furious. They looked at all the gifts for some time. The young lady found many excuses not to accept them, but the result was always the same. Without these mines, Ethel Wallace could not have received such expensive gifts. She was very sorry that they only needed the mines. Lena could not admit that the apology was needed only for this. Lena continued to beat around the bush, hiding behind lies and gifts, but Ethel knew the bitter truth. Lena turned to the young lady and said that she was really sorry that she had been treated that way. She said that perhaps her sister wanted to take out all her anger on her. Ethel was furious. She wondered when the young lady would stop acting like this. She wondered if the young lady wanted her to be angry with her. Lena, looking at the young lady with tears in her eyes, said that she knew that she was angry with her brother, and she could not take it all out on her. Lena came closer to her and asked if she couldn't forget about her brother for a moment and treat her with love and understanding. Ethel was shocked. Ethel looked at the young lady in bewilderment and wondered why she should treat her with love. Lena said that she would scold her brother well. She asked her sister to give him another chance. Ethel was in shock and did not understand what was happening at all. Lena had previously said that she came to apologize in place of her older brother, but she never apologized. Ethel wondered if the young lady had decided that she was angry with her brother but liked her. She hated her husband the most, but the rest of the family was no better as they constantly ignored her. Ethel looked angrily at the young lady and asked why she suddenly decided that she liked her. The young lady asked with surprise and a smile what she was talking about. Lena said that it was simply impossible not to love her. Ethel was shocked. This statement made her wonder if the young lady had always been like this. She didn't understand how this was possible. After returning to the past, Lena was surrounded by nothing but adoring admirers. Unfortunately for her, only villains treated her badly. In Lena's world, this is simply impossible. She cannot even imagine that someone would carelessly hate her. Lena looked at the young lady and asked what she was thinking about. Ethel, in turn, said that she was not thinking about anything. The young lady smiled and told her sister to take at least one gift for herself, if only out of love for her. Ethel was confused because she was in a very difficult situation. If she gave in to her feelings now, she would make Lena her enemy, but she had no strength left for reason after reading the novella today. Lena looked at the young lady and smiled, and told her not to ignore her and to answer faster. Ethel looked at the young lady and said she would be honest with her. Ethel told Lena that she didn't like her, and she didn't want to see her from now on. She told the young lady to disappear and never appear before her again. Lena looked at the young lady with an angry look. Everyone was shocked because they did not expect to see her like this. Ethel turned and told the young lady that she was seeing her out. She would not be there so she could leave the premises herself. The knight rushed towards Ethel in rage. He could not understand how she dared to insult my lady. Tay arrived in time and prevented the knight from committing an irreparable act. Tay looked at the knight with a grin and asked for forgiveness, saying that he had not noticed him. The knight looked at the young man with fury and asked who he was. The Marquise said that he was just a random passerby. Ethel was shocked and also confused. She didn't understand how he got there. She wondered if he had heard their conversation. The knight wanted to teach the young man a lesson, but Lena shouted for them to stop. She told the knight that he was disgracing her family's reputation. She looked at the knight and her maid and said that they were returning home. Ethel stared after them, shocked. The Marquis came closer to her and asked if she was okay. The young lady sighed heavily and said that this sight was not intended for his eyes. The Marquis smiled and said that compared to his family, hers was a model of prosperity, and the young lady in turn knew that this was true. The Marquis looked at her intently and said in a puzzled tone that she had not said that her husband was from the Cassius family. The young lady understood that he already knew everything, and there was no point in hiding it. She timidly said that he had not asked her about it. The Marquis looked at her intently and sighing heavily said that it would not be easy to divorce such a man. The young lady herself knew that this was the case. She said that she had filed papers with the court, but it seemed that there was some problem. She looked at the Marquis and asked if he had spoken with his fellow mercenary. The Marquis sighed heavily and said that he had spoken and his colleague had told him that someone was waiting for him at home. The young lady looking at him said that he should hurry. Then the Marquis said that he often sees this man anyway, and it would be okay if he was late. The young lady was confused. She did not know who was waiting for him at home. She thought that someone important was waiting for him, since the servant ran to him in a hurry. The young lady thought for a moment about the man he often saw and who could not be kept waiting. Looking at the Marquis, she realized that he was the Emperor. She shouted that he needed to go quickly. The young man was in shock. He said that he was in no hurry at all. The young lady said that she would wait, and he needed to quickly go to meet her. She knew that if this man really was the Emperor, then there was a high probability that he had a really important conversation with the Marquis. He has been in the shadows for a long time, but soon everyone will hear his name. The servant ran up to the Marquis and called him. He was puzzled. The servant said that he asked the Marquis to hurry. The servant was very excited. The Marquis looked at the servant and asked where the Emperor was. He said that His Majesty was waiting for him in the main hall. The Marquis said that he should have told the Emperor not to wait for him and to return to the palace. The servant was shocked. He said that the Emperor really wanted to see him. The servant looked at the Marquis and said that his outfit was not very suitable for the meeting. The Marquis said that he did not have time to change. A moment later, the Marquis went into the room where the Emperor was. The young man greeted the Emperor politely and, according to all the rules of etiquette, Dominic, the 23rd Emperor of Astarossa. The Emperor looked at the Marquis and said that he had finally come as he had been waiting for him for a long time. The young man asked for forgiveness and told the Emperor that he should have warned him in advance about his visit. Then he would have prepared. The Emperor said that he could communicate with him without formalities. The Emperor looked closely at his son and said that he understood that he was enjoying his youth to the fullest. The Emperor asked in bewilderment how long one could wander somewhere. The Emperor was puzzled by his son's appearance. The young man did not answer, as he knew that the young lady had bought him these clothes. She told him with a smile that one should choose based on quality, and not being fashion-oriented, she said that a suit is the second face of a business person. She said that he should take what she offered him. Ethel said that she did not understand him at all since he refused the offered clothes. The young man was a little surprised, as the young lady was too kind to him. The Emperor looked at his son in surprise and called him as he was in the clouds. The young man sighed heavily and looked away. He said that he had nothing to say, looking at his son. The emperor said that he understood that he wanted to see the world. The emperor said that from that day on, it was time for him to begin to master the skills required of individuals of royal blood. The young man looked at his father in surprise and asked what he was talking about. The emperor told Terence with a smile that he was his son and he would like to introduce him to the palace. Terence looked away from the emperor and said that he needed to think about it. The emperor in turn sighed heavily and said that there was nothing to think about. He knew he would be a prince someday. He would be lying if he said he had never dreamed of it. He knew that now was the best time with Vidor's position weakened by the rise of the Cassiuses. The crown prince is now caring for an orphan, and the empress's position at the palace has worsened. The emperor looked at his son and asked if he did not want power. The young man thought for a moment, but did not answer. He was not interested in power at all, but he wanted to look at the face of the empress who had just recently sent an assassin after him. He was interested in how Mikhail would react, who had been used to getting everything without much effort since childhood. The emperor said that if he inherited the throne, he would have everything he wanted. The emperor asked if he really didn't have what he wanted. He knew that even if he became a prince, he would only want one thing. The young man did not wonder for a moment what he was thinking about at all. He knew that after he answered his father with consent, his life would change dramatically because such offers are not refused. A moment later he sighed heavily and said that he was ready to become a prince. The emperor looked at his son in surprise and asked if he really had what he wanted so much. Terence said with a smile that he wanted to help one person. The emperor was perplexed. He asked his son what he wanted to help with and who this person was. The Marquis smiled and told his father that they could talk about it later. The emperor sighed heavily and said that he was very boring. Terence looked at his father and said that he had heard some interesting news. The Duke looked at his son with fury and asked how they were going to get out of this. Now the young man asked his father for forgiveness. The Duke said that he didn't even know how this story with the emperor would end. A couple of days ago, at the Central Imperial Court, an official inspection sent by His Majesty the Emperor came to the court. The Emperor looked at the Duke with a heavy look and said that he had bribed an official to spoil the documents. The Emperor said that it seemed that his son loved his wife more than life itself. The Duke asked the Emperor for forgiveness and said that he had made a mistake. The Emperor said that they had broken the law, but he would still allow his family to maintain their reputation. The Duke, puzzled, thanked the Emperor for his kindness. The Duke looked at his son with fury and asked what he was going to do. Now the Duke said that the divorce application had been filed after all, and he would soon have to go to court. The Duke shouted furiously that soon everyone would know exactly which family was being talked about in the news. Leandro said that he would settle everything and try to make peace with his wife before the trial. The Duke told his son that if he really was capable of this, then the matter would not have reached the trial. The young man said that he would certainly succeed. The Duke sighed heavily and said that he would not succeed, and now he was only making things worse. The young man was surprised and puzzled. He told his father that he had never behaved like that. Lena burst into the room and told them to stop arguing. She went to her father and asked him to stop scolding her brother. The Duke looked at his daughter and said that it was none of her business. Lena said that her brother wanted the best. The Duke told his daughter that she better go and rest. The young lady trembled with fear and told her father not to send her away. She said that it concerned their family. She shouted that if they continued to behave like this and argue, she would definitely refuse dinner. Leandro and the Duke were shocked by the young lady's statement. She looked at them and said that she would not have dinner either. The Duke looked at his daughter in shock and said that she might get sick if she didn't eat well. Leandro in turn said that she might faint. Leheim shouted to his sister that this could not be done since she was their fragile flower. The young lady looked at her father and said that if he cared about her so much, then he should trust her and give Leandro another chance. The Duke looked at his son and said that he could do whatever he wanted. The young lady thanked her father with a smile and hugged him tightly. The young lady looked at her brother and asked if he had a plan. The young man said that she was right. He should apologize to his wife. The young lady looked at him and told him to be careful, because it seemed to her that his wife was very angry. Lena said that she actually visited her yesterday, and Ethel said that she didn't love her, and that she wanted her to disappear. Leheim looked at his sister in surprise and said that it was obvious that the young lady had simply lied to her. Leandro looked at his sister and, sighing heavily, asked for forgiveness. He said that because of him, she fell under the hot hand of his wife. Lena smiled and said that it was okay, as she was surprised at first, but then she realized that the young lady was definitely not serious, as they missions get along very well. Leheim said that Ethel had gone off the rails. He was perplexed because he knew that this quarrel concerned his brother and wife. He did not understand how his sister had deserved such treatment. The young lady looked at her brother and said that he would have to try very hard if he wanted to return the love of his wife. The young man was surprised and puzzled. He did not know what to do. He said that with each of their meetings, everything was getting worse and worse. The young lady looked at her brother and told him to listen to her carefully, as she would give him some advice. Ethel, in turn, walked and enjoyed nature. She saw a beautiful garden that was in the hotel. She smiled and told her companion that the weather was just wonderful today, and also asked if he would like to have a cup of tea in the gazebo. He smiled and said that they could have one, and also asked her permission to order them some tea. The young lady, in turn, was very happy since the divorce case went much faster. She thought that soon the Marquise had a hand in it. She wanted to thank him with a cup of aromatic tea. A moment later, she saw the young ladies whispering to each other. She looked at them in bewilderment. A moment later, she saw her husband's carriage, and a few minutes later, she saw him. The young man joyfully approached his wife and called her. The young lady was shocked that her husband had appeared again. Leandro knelt before his wife and asked for forgiveness. Looking at his wife, he smiled and asked to give him another chance. The young lady was shocked, but did not understand what was happening at all. He smiled and asked her to come back home to him. She looked at him and told him to get up immediately. The young man, looking at his wife, said that he was not going to get up. He said that he would remain in this position until she forgave him. Ethel looked at him and told him to stop and get up quickly. He smiled a radiant smile and told her not to worry so much, as he did not feel sorry for his knee or his dignity. She looked at him with fury and told him to get up immediately. Gritting her teeth, she told him to follow her. Leandro called for his wife, but she did not stop. The young lady glanced sideways at her husband and angrily asked why he had come. He looked at her in surprise and asked why she was asking, since everything was obvious, and he came to apologize to her since she was his wife. The young lady sighed heavily and said that it was simply unbelievable. She asked how he had the audacity to ask her for forgiveness. He looked at her in surprise and asked what was wrong with that. He said that he had made a mistake and now he had to change. She looked at him and said that she thought everything was clear with him and no apologies would help here. Ethel said he had made a scene in the garden, interrupted her from her walk. She asked if such were the manners of a noble family. He looked at her and said that if he had warned her in advance, she would not have wanted to see him. The young lady looked at him and said that it was natural and she had every right to refuse to meet with him. He was surprised and said that they were married. Leandro asked if it was really a sin for a husband to want to visit his wife. The young lady looked at him with a smirk. After he said those words, she looked at him with a puzzled expression and asked if they could be called husband and wife. The young man became silent for a moment, as he did not know what to say to her. She looked at him angrily and asked if he thought he could win her forgiveness. Leandro looked away from his wife and said that Lena had previously explained to her about the gel with the mines. She asked him in surprise if he really wanted to say that he first became close to her because of the mines, but as soon as he saw her, he fell in love. The young man said that it was not nonsense, and he really fell in love with her. He was just ashamed to admit it. She asked in surprise if he was serious. Ethel asked why he ignored her all these years. Since he fell in love with her, the young man hesitated and said that he could not tell her. The young lady sighed heavily and said that this was the end of their relationship. She said that he had to decide for himself what to do next. He approached her and said with a smile that he could promise that if she came home in future, he would be responsible in his marital duties and would pamper and cherish her. The young lady accepted his bouquet. The young man looked at her with a smile and hope. A moment later, she went to the barrel and threw the bouquet into it. She said it was too late. Leandro froze in bewilderment. He was in shock because he did not expect this. The young lady looked at him sideways and told him not to waste time and to leave quickly. He was in shock and screamed at his wife to stop. He wanted her to give him just one chance. Leandro grabbed her hand. Ethel was in shock. She screamed for him to let her go immediately. He said that he promised that he would find time to communicate with her. The young lady said in a dull voice that she did not want to talk to him anymore. The young man was very angry and perplexed. He asked what was so terrible about discussing everything normally. The young lady said angrily that she did not want to talk to him anymore since Kay had already spoken about it before. A moment later, the young lady froze in shock as Ethel saw someone push her husband away. The Marquis looked at the young man with disdain and said that he should not cling to those who were indifferent to him. The Marquis approached the young lady and apologized for his delay. He said that he had to wait until the owner of the tea house returned. Leandro looked at the young man with a puzzled expression and asked who he was looking at his sword. He said that he was definitely an unusual waiter. The Marquis looked at the young man with a grin and said that he was still capable of making a cup of tea, but he specialized in other things. The young lady was surprised since the Cassiuses did not yet know the Marquis by sight. The Marquis smiled and said that his work would certainly be more useful than his broom. Ethel sighed heavily and said that the young man was her bodyguard. Leandro was shocked that his wife had a bodyguard. The lady said that she hired a bodyguard just for such cases. Leandro looked angrily at his wife and asked what kind of relationship she had with this man. Terence looked at the young lady in surprise and asked if her ex-husband also had hearing problems. Leandro shouted furiously that he could hear perfectly well. He looked at the young man in surprise and asked why he called him his ex-husband. Leandro said that they were still married. The Marquis looked at the young man with a grin and said that he apologized since he misspoke a little. The Marquis said that it would be more accurate to say that he would soon be her ex-husband. Ethel looked at her bodyguard and, sighing heavily, said that he still shouldn't try to argue with Leandro. Ethel looked at her husband and said that if he had anything else to say, he could say it and leave already. Leandro looked at Tay and asked if he had really been hanging around his wife all this time if he was her bodyguard. The young lady looked at her husband and said that they were only together when they went outside. The young man shouted that this was not right because she was still a married woman. Ethel looked at him with anger and bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. Leandro said, puzzled, that she had a husband, but she went everywhere with a mercenary. He looked at her and asked what would happen if people misunderstood everything. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked what they could possibly misunderstand. Leandro said that people might think that she was unfaithful to him. The young lady looked at him with a smile and asked if he meant that it might look like they were having an affair. Leandro looked at his wife and said that he had no doubt about her, but others might spread rumors. The lady smiled and said that the main thing was that her husband trusted her, and she didn't care what others thought. The young man was shocked by what he heard in a trembling voice saying that her reputation could be at risk. The young lady looked at her husband with fury and asked him how he was behaving now. Leandro looked at his wife with surprise and confusion and asked what she was talking about. Ethel looked at her husband and asked if Chris was with him by any chance. He looked at her in surprise and asked why she suddenly remembered Chris. She came closer to him and asked him angrily what kind of Chris is a man. He looked at her with bewilderment and timidly said that Chris is a woman. The young man looked at his wife in shock and asked if she really wanted him to choose between her and Chris. Ethel smirked at him and said that of course she didn't want that. She said she just wanted to show that she was never jealous of him towards her. Leandro shouted angrily that it was not the same thing. The young lady looked at us in bewilderment at his husband and asked what the difference was then. Leandro looked at her and shouted that their relationship was purely business. The young lady sighed heavily and said that they also had a business relationship if he hadn't figured that out already. Leandro shouted with all his anger that they had the same thing. Ethel said that Thea works for her and this man is her bodyguard. She looked at him angrily and said that she had already told him earlier that he spent half his time with Chris. The young lady looked at her husband with a smile and asked if he could pay a little more attention to her. He sighed heavily and said that he was very tired. He asked angrily if she didn't understand how a person who had just returned from work felt. The young lady was puzzled and offended as she could not object to her husband. He looked at her and said that he really was very tired then. The young lady looked at her husband intently and said that it seemed he still did not understand anything, and she proposed to end their unpleasant conversation there. Leandro was in shock. He shouted to his wife that he would definitely change the young lady, said that she did not believe a single word of his. He looked at her with fury and asked what would happen if she gave him those mines. The young lady stared at him shocked as he started talking about the mines again. He looked at her and said with a smile that he could swear they would remain untouched if that was what she wanted. He said he just wanted them to be registered in his precious sister's name. Ethel looked at him angrily and said that she saw that his greatest concern was still the happiness of his precious sister, and she told him furiously not to even hope, as she would never give her the mines. The young man was furious and shocked. He looked at her and asked what she just said. He said that it looked like she was joking. He told her to stop it already. The young lady sighed heavily and said that it didn't matter because nothing would change. Ethel said she wouldn't care if he left her mines. She said she wouldn't care if he instantly turned into the man of her dreams. She looked at him with fury and said that she had told him the truth before and was telling it now. Ethel looked at him with disdain and told him to leave her alone and go to his adored sister and live with her for the rest of his days. Leandro was shocked. He looked at his wife with a sad look and called her. The young lady looked at her bodyguard and said with a smile that it was time for them to go. Ethel was furious as her husband continued to lie to her that he did not want her. Mines and the young lady in turn walked away from him with her head held high. Ethel knew that Leandro and Terence had met and that it would soon reach Lena's ears. She thought that it would have been better if he had been a simple bodyguard. She knew she needed to get in touch with Tara right away and ask her about what was going on in the Cassius family right now. Yulia did not look at the Marquis, and asking for forgiveness said that her husband had been a little rude. The young man smiled and said that it was better for her to call him her ex-husband. The young lady opium-sewed and said that he was right. Ethel looked at the Marquis and timidly said that she was worried that her ex-husband might offend him with his suspicions. The young lady bowed her head and asked for forgiveness and said that she did not want there to be awkwardness between them. He smiled and said that she should not worry about it as he was not at all offended. The young lady was very glad that he forgave her. She saw that he was very good, even too good. She looked at him in surprise and asked why he looked so depressed. He looked at her and said that her ex-husband was better than he expected. The Marquis looked at the young lady intently and said that he meant his appearance. The young lady was surprised. She did not understand how her husband's appearance was connected with the Marquis's bad mood. She said with a smile that he was not so handsome. She knew that a drop of sweet lies would help her win his complete favor. The Marquis looked at her in surprise and asked if she really thought so. The young lady smiled and said that it was so, and that in her opinion Thea was much more beautiful than her husband. The Marquis froze in bewilderment as he was not prepared to hear something like this. He looked away from the young lady timidly and said that it seemed like the tea was beginning to show. The young lady was very happy that he finally noticed the effect. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked with a smile how he understood it. She asked if something had changed. The Marquis said he had suffered from severe migraines since childhood, but recently, to his surprise, the pain had subsided. He looked at the young lady and asked if she could share the recipe for this tea if she didn't mind, and he also asked how much the ingredients would cost. The young lady was glad that he finally noticed everything she wanted to give him the tea recipe, and he would help her with the divorce. He knew it was a perfect deal. She smiled and said that she would give him the tea recipe, but she asked if she could ask him for a favor in return. He smiled and said that he would do whatever she asked him to do. The young lady's expression quickly changed, and she seriously asked him to help her with the divorce, calling him Marquis Freeheiden. The Marquis froze in shock. He was perplexed because he did not expect to hear from her that she knew his true identity. The Marquis's face changed with lightning speed, and he asked seriously how she knew his identity. The young lady smiled and said that she heard the servant who came to him call him by his title. The Marquis sighed heavily and said that his subordinate was simply an idiot. The young lady mentally asked him for forgiveness, since she did not want to set him up, but she had no choice. He looked at her intently and said that she definitely could not hear his last name. The young lady looked at him timidly and said that although it was difficult to call her a socialite, she was still destined to become a duchess. The young lady said that several marquises were at her wedding, and she had also seen a couple of faces in books, but there was another young marquise whose face she had never seen. She said it was not ball season, but he was here, which meant he either never left the capital or had no land. He sighed heavily and said that the only person who fit all the criteria was Marquise Freeheiden. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she had learned all this only because of his servant's mistake. The young lady smiled and said that in fact he had only finally dispelled all her doubts. The young man froze in bewilderment. He said that it seemed that she had already guessed everything a long time ago. The young lady smiled, and moving closer to him said that he should have pretended to be a commoner better. He smiled and asked permission to formally introduce himself to her. He smiled and said his name was Terence Freeheiden, and he holds the title of Marquis, but it doesn't matter. He looked at her and said that he agreed to help her with the divorce proceedings in exchange for the recipe for this wonderful tea. The young lady smiled and timidly said that she was happy to give him the tea recipe for free, but he should understand for himself that her situation was not an easy one. Terence looked at the young lady and said that this tea was her creation, so it would be fair if he paid in full for it. In turn, the young lady knew that strictly speaking this tea was Lena's creation, but she did not want to argue with the Marquis. The young man looked closely at the young lady and asked how exactly he could help her. He asked if she really needed financial help. The young lady smiled and said that she expected political support from him. She said that first it was necessary to prevent Duke Cassius from interfering in the trial. Although the Cassiuses are the main characters of the novel, they never shied away from mean and dishonest methods. There were even rumors that there were demons in the Cassius family tree. Because of this, the father of the family was nicknamed the Demonic Duke. The Marquise looked at her and asked if she was sure that the Duke would really interfere with her. Ethel sighed heavily and said she was willing to put everything she had on the line. He asked why she thought he had the power to stop the Duke. He said he was nothing more than the Emperor's helpless bastard son. She knew he would soon be a prince. She looked at him and said with a smile that he helped her push the papers through to the court. The Marquis looked at her in surprise and asked why she thought it was him. The young lady was shocked because she saw that he was persistent. She said she received a notice from the court the day after he went home. She looked at the Marquis intently and said that she wanted to believe it. The Marquis looked at her in surprise as he did not expect to hear something like that. She said she felt like she was fighting alone against a powerful enemy, but she felt better knowing someone was on her side. For a moment, the young man frowned. Not knowing what to answer, the young lady looking at him wondered if she had been too hasty with her confession. She did not know what would happen if he did not want to help her. The Marquis came closer to her and asked with a smile if she would like to take a short walk with him. The young lady looked at him in bewilderment. He smiled and said that the weather was fine and they could go for a walk. Sometime later, they were leisurely strolling through the streets. She looked at him with a smile and suggested going shopping. He looked at her puzzled and told her not to tell him that she wanted to give him another gift. She looked at him puzzled and said that she was not going to do that since she knew that he was much richer than her. He said with a smile that he swears that he will repay her for her generous gifts. She looked at him in surprise and asked if it was possible to pay for gifts. She said that if it was so important to him, then he could give her something in return. He smiled and said that they had agreed on this and she could choose whatever she wanted. The young lady smiled and said that she would not need to be persuaded, but she was afraid that her wishes would leave him penniless. A moment later, they were walking around different shops and choosing different gifts for the young lady who was lost in thought because she didn't know what to choose. The Marquis looked at the salesman and said that they would take everything on display. The young lady sighed heavily and said that it was not necessary since she had already chosen. Sometime after going to the store, they went into a cafe. The young lady wanted to treat him to dessert. The Marquis sighed heavily and said that he did not like sweets. Ethel and Terence walked slowly back to the hotel while the Marquis carried all the young lady's purchases. He sighed heavily and said that his life had been dull before. He said he was told to be content with what he had and never ask for more. He said he had to pretend to be invisible. The Marquis looked at the young lady and said that there were times when he had to hide his real name behind nicknames such as they, for example. She sighed heavily and said that he needed to think about whether to accept her proposals or not. Terence said he needed to become more than just the unknown Marquis of Freeheiden who had nothing but a title. Ethel in turn looked at him intently but said nothing. Looking at him, Ethel wanted to get to know him even better. The young lady smiled, looking at the Marquis, and said that she understood him perfectly. She said that he could take his time with his answer since she would wait for him. The young lady wanted to make him believe that she was serious about her intentions. Ethel looked at the Marquis and said that she was going to move to the Red Branch Hotel, but if she was not in the room, he could leave a message in the reception area. The Marquis asked in surprise if she was really going alone. He asked if she really didn't need her bodyguard anymore. Ethel looked at him puzzled and asked how she dared to ask for the Marquis's escort. The Marquis sighed heavily and said that he was very sorry. He asked if she really didn't want to continue their relationship. The young lady was puzzled and shocked by what he was saying. She did not understand what kind of relationship he was talking about. She timidly said that she did not want to interfere with him thinking about her proposals. He said that he could think and protect her at the same time. The Marquis smiled and said that their possible deal did not in any way concern his duty as a bodyguard. He asked if she agreed with him. The young lady was surprised but still agreed with a smile. She was surprised that he also wanted to spend more time with her. He smiled and asked where she was going now. She said that she was going to William Street because she wanted to see a lawyer. The Marquis thought for a moment. The young lady looked at him in surprise because she did not understand what had happened. She wondered if he did not want her to see a lawyer. He smiled and said that she could just call him Thea. She smiled and said that they could go now, and Ethel called him Thea. The young lady thanked the lawyer for the tea as it was excellent. Sharon Matings was a divorce lawyer. Ethel noticed that the lawyer's office was a mess, but she also knew that the lawyer's abilities were beyond doubt, and Lena confirmed this in the original novel. According to the plot, Lena brings a woman who suffers from domestic violence to her for help. She went to Sharon specifically because she remembered that she would be very successful in the future. Thanks to this woman, we were able to get a divorce as quickly and safely as possible. And after some time, the amazing truth was revealed. The woman who suffered from domestic violence turned out to be the lost daughter of the ambassador from the Kingdom of Leoc. Ethel looked at Miss Sharon and said she would like to hire her. Sharon sighed heavily and said it would be a difficult matter. Ethel said it was no big deal since it would end in divorce anyway. Sharon looked away and said that she was sure the young lady could easily find a more experienced lawyer. The young lady said that after all, she was the only one who specialized in divorces. Ethel said she believed Sharon would not succumb to the temptations of Duke Cassius, who would certainly try to bribe both the lawyer and the judge. Sharon said the lady's case would be the most high-profile divorce since the founding of the empire, and she said she doubted she was competent enough to handle it. The young lady looked at the lawyer and asked with a smile if she was worried that if they lost, fewer people would try to get a divorce. The young lady came closer to the lawyer and said that she had been closely following her activities for some time. Ethel said she had done a lot of pro bono work representing women in desperate need of help, and it was things like that that had gotten her into debt. Sharon told the young lady that she was not a commoner but a noble lady, and she could hire any lawyer she wanted. Ethel said with tears in her eyes that every lawyer in the city had already refused her, and she was her last hope because if she lost this case, then other women throughout the empire would be afraid to file for divorce because of the bad example, and then she could lose her bread. Sharon looked at the young lady and asked if she was trying to scare her. Ethel, in turn, said that she was not trying to scare her at all, as it was just a logical prediction. Ethel smiled and said that it was not only a risk, but also a great opportunity. Ethel smiled and said that if she agreed, she would have a chance to win in court against Duke Cassius. Sharon said that the young lady spoke correctly. Sharon told the young lady that it was very important that she had an objective reason for the divorce. She said that even if she did, she was afraid of the Duke's influence, which could greatly harm them. The young lady looked intently at her future lawyer and said firmly that she had a reason. She said that her husband had not yet blown up her child. Sharon said that if there is a problem with childbearing, it can be attributed to the infernal nature of her husband. The Marquis was shocked by what he heard. He did not expect such a thing. Sharon looked at the young lady with a smile and said that if her husband really took her as his wife, hiding such an important issue, then this could serve as grounds for a divorce. Sharon looked at the young lady and asked if she was sure that everything was exactly like that and that the problem was in her husband. The young lady in turn doubted that the main character's older brother could be impotent. The young lady sighed heavily and said with tears in her eyes that she really didn't know for sure. She sighed heavily and said that he had never fulfilled his marital duty, and the Marquis and his lawyer were shocked by what they heard. Sharon said she heard rumors while she was at the academy, but she never thought they could be true. Ethel knew that one rumor was spread by his enemy, but this will not stop her from spinning this rumor and completely disgracing her husband. She knew that he would soon come running to her himself, since he himself would want to divorce her and hush up this matter as quickly as possible. Sharon said that it turned out that he had not fulfilled his marital duty. She asked if he had not warned her about anything before the wedding. Sharon in turn said that her husband was simply terrible. The Marquis was perplexed and in shock. Sharon said that it was quite obvious that this marriage was deeply flawed. Sharon asked the young lady if she had simply put up with it all this time. The Marquis said that the young man was the worst of all. She said she didn't know if this was grounds for divorce. The young lady told a story about trying on a wedding dress after listening to her. Sharon said her husband was just crazy. Sharon looked at the young lady and thanked her for sharing this information with them. Sharon said that she now saw that the young lady had had a hard time all this time. Sharon said that she would help her, and she would know that she was not alone. The young lady looked at Sharon in surprise. Tears flowed from her eyes like a river. She was very surprised. Sharon was shocked. She was scared that the lady was crying in front of her. The Marquis smiled and handed her a handkerchief. The young lady thanked him. She was grateful to them for their sincere words of comfort. Sharon looked at the young lady and said that she never thought that something like this could happen to her, and she was very sorry that Ethel had to go through all this. Ethel said that everything was fine because she herself did not tell anything until the last moment. Ethel handed over a bag of money and told her to take the money as an advance. She said that if Sharon decided to work for her, she would pay even more. Ethel said that she could use it to pay off debts and hire reliable assistants. Sharon opened the bag of money and looked at it with puzzlement. The young lady looked at the lawyer with a surprised look and asked if something was wrong. Sharon looked at the young lady and timidly said that everything was fine. Ethel knew that something had happened and asked the lawyer to tell her what it was. Sharon timidly said that there simply wasn't enough money to pay off the debts, much less hire assistants. The young lady knew that she should have asked her husband for more jewelry as a gift. Sharon said that the young lady did not have to pay her anything. It would be enough to pay the legal costs. The Marquis told Sharon that this was all the young lady had. He took the bag of money and returned it to its owner. A moment later, the Marquis handed the lawyer a blank check and said that she could write down the required amount and present the check at the Imperial Bank. Sharon was shocked to see the blank check, her hands shaking as she looked at it in surprise. The Marquis said that she could contribute enough to cover all the costs. He said that they would like her not to be distracted by anything, including other clients. A moment later, the lawyer saw the Marquis's name returned and said that he did not want anyone else to know about his involvement in this matter. He looked at her and asked if she understood him. Sharon said that, of course, she understood and would not disclose anything. Ethel looked at the Marquis with a smile as she was very glad that he had helped her. Ethel was very glad that everything was going as it should. She knew that now all that was left was to find the ambassador's daughter. She looked at Sharon and said she had one more request for her. Ethel said she had recently seen a woman named Anna, and she felt like there was something wrong going on with my family. Ethel asked if she could take care of that as well. Sharon smiled and told the young lady to leave it all to her. The young lady looked at the Marquis and said with a smile that she thought he would need more time to think. She said that she was talking now about their agreement. She was surprised that he revealed his identity to the lawyer, so it seemed he was already willing to cooperate. He smiled and said that he was a simple man and long thoughts would not suit his character. She knew he was lying to her, but she was still glad. The young lady looked at him intently and thanked him for paying for her. She said that she would definitely pay him back. He smiled and said that she should not worry about such things, since her tea recipe was priceless. She smiled and said that if he helped her get a divorce, she was ready to brew it personally for the rest of her life. She said that she would change hotels again today. She just needed to pick up her things. She said that she didn't want her ex-family to know where she lived. The Marquis looked at her intently and said that the carriage was not currently heading to the hotel. The young lady looked at him in surprise, as she did not understand what he was talking about. The Marquis smiled and said that they were going to his estate. Now he said that she could relax and live with him forever. The young lady was surprised. She, of course, thanked him for handing her over, because if society found out that she had moved in with a single Marquis and not even divorced, it would be a big disaster. He smiled and said that she had misunderstood him, since this was the unofficial residence of the Marquis, and the villa was outside the capital. He said that officially it belonged to another person, so the Cassiuses wouldn't find it so easily. The car looked at him and said with a smile that, in that case, she would be happy to stay at his villa. He smiled and said that now they were officially in the same boat. The Marquis, with a sly smile, invited her to shake hands. The young lady saw that he was doing more for her than she asked. Ethel was puzzled and could not understand why he was so kind to her. She smiled and said that he would not regret this decision. She doubted him, since now her comrade was a Marquis himself. The Marquis was puzzled. He sighed heavily and said that this was not like him at all. His assistant looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. The Marquis asked himself in surprise why he had given the check to the lawyer. He had planned to wait a week and watch how things would develop. He was shocked that he had revealed the location of the villa himself. He did not understand what was happening to him at all. Jack looked at the gentleman in surprise and asked with a smile. If the young lady was an unusual guest, he said that he would order the maid to keep an eye on her. The Marquis looked at his subordinate and told him to stop talking and that he had better start preparing. Jack asked in surprise what he should prepare for. The Marquis said that he would be leaving the guests somewhere for a couple of days. Jack looked at the gentleman in surprise and asked what he was talking about and where he was going to go. The Marquis sighed heavily and said that they were going to leave for Ashton. Ashton, the capital of the Duchy of Cassius. The young lady was glad that they had finally arrived. The Marquis smiled and said that he was also glad that they had arrived. Ethel smiled and said that it was great to travel first class after all. The Marquis looked at her and said that it looked like they were a little ahead of schedule. He said that they could take their time. The young lady smiled and agreed with him. The Marquis looked at her and asked if the maid would come to meet her. Ethel said that if she were in Laura's place, she would definitely come. Laura came with her to the estate from her home and was assigned the role of a witness who would confirm her husband's neglect. The young lady sent her maid a request for a meeting by mail. She hoped that he would still come to her. He said that he saw that the fair was in full swing here. Ethel said that there were always some festivals going on in the city. The Marquis looked at her and presented her with a beautiful mask. He said that she had said earlier that her face was not particularly well known in society, but still just in case she needed to wear a mask. The young lady stood there in bewilderment, as she was a little surprised. The young lady, of course, thanked him for such concern, but still wondered if it was really that difficult for him to warn her about this in advance. She was very embarrassed. The Marquis saw that the poster said that today was little Lena's birthday. He asked if the Duke really loved his adopted daughter so much that he even arranged a festival in her honor. The young lady smiled and said that Lena Cassius and little Lena were not the same thing. The young lady said that this was the name of her pet dog, Percy, and the young lady's birthday was on another day, and the festival in honor of this date was incomparably more magnificent than today. She said that the celebrations lasted 15 days. It was also the day of her adoption. The Marquis was puzzled that the Duke was holding a festival in honor of a puppy's birthday. A moment later, the young lady heard someone calling her. She turned around and saw a maid. Ethel called Laura in her joy. She was very glad to see her. Ethel was glad to see her friend. She quickly rushed into her arms. Laura smiled and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Ethel introduced Terence to Laura and said with a smile on her face that he helps her with everything. Ethel looked at Laura and asked if she had thought about her request. Ethel, that going against the Cassiuses could be very dangerous. But she looked at the young lady and said with a smile that she could not even doubt she would of course be on her side. Ethel was shocked by what she heard, as she did not expect such a thing. Ethel looked at the maid and saw that there was a suitcase next to her. She said that these were all her things, as she no longer worked in their house, so she could follow my lady anywhere. Ethel grabbed Laura's hand and said that they needed to go faster, or they might miss the train unexpectedly for the young lady. Laura screamed. Ethel looked at Laura in surprise. Ethel let her friend and asked, "What was the matter, young or not?" asked. Did she really squeeze her hand too tightly? Laura timidly said that it was not so. Ethel saw that the young lady's hand was shaking. Ethel turned to her friend and said that she understood, but that she should still tell her what was going on, and was silent for a moment, not knowing what to say. A moment later, Laura burst into tears and asked the young lady for forgiveness. She was shaking and crying. Laura said that she did not leave the Cassiuses herself, but she was fired. Ethel, partly from what she heard, asked her friend what she was talking about. The young lady was furious. She did not understand who dared to fire Laura without her consent and decision. Laura said in a trembling voice that the housekeeper had ordered it so. Some time later, they were already sitting on the bench and talking. Laura looked at the young lady and said that it happened just on the day when the letter from the young lady arrived. Laura said that several maids brought portraits of Lady Lena to her room and hung them on the wall. Laura looked at the young lady and said that the maids said that this room would now belong to Lena. Ethel was shocked and wondered how this was even possible. Laura said that she wanted to stop them, but accidentally stained one of the portraits. The young lady looked at her friend and asked if that was the reason she was fired. Laura said that she was very glad that at least they did not make her reimburse the cost of the portrait, but they did not give her a letter of recommendation. So now the road to other noble houses was closed to her. Laura, with tears in her eyes, said that she was also punished. Ethel was shocked by what she heard. She couldn't believe that the housekeeper would treat the maid that way. Ethel, in turn, did not judge Laura harshly. After all, she was just learning to perform the duties of a maid. With tears in her eyes, she asked the young lady for forgiveness. She said that she did not tell the young mistress everything at once because she was afraid that it would upset her. The young lady looked at the maid and said that she was really upset. Ethel looked at the tearful maid and said that she was just on her side. That's why they were angry with her. Ethel knew that the Duchy of Cassius was ruled by one of the most influential families in the empire. They were responsible for the defense of the North. She knew everything about this family because until recently, she herself was a part of it. The maids smiled as they wished Percy, the young lady's personal dog, a happy birthday. But a moment later, the maids heard a noise. Turning around, they saw a young lady in an escort. The maids looked at the young lady in surprise and asked what she was doing here. They said that the Duke and Lord Leandro were delayed in the capital looking at them. The young lady understood that they were still not aware of the latest events. The young lady looked at the maids with disdain and said that Laura had told her that they had tried to hang portraits of the young mistress in her chambers. Ethel looked at the maids and asked if she had ordered them to do something like that. The maids hesitated and timidly said that this was not so. The young lady approached one of the maids and asked, "Since when are the servants of the Cassius estate free to do whatever they want and refurbish their mistress's room without permission?" The maid was trembling with fear. She did not know what to answer. The young lady looked at the maids with contempt and anger and then asked why they wanted to hang Lena's portraits in her room. The maid said in a trembling voice that they thought that my lady would like it. The young lady in turn knew that every single inhabitant of the estate loved Lena very much. She knew that they were not very intelligent, and they had no excuse. The young lady looked at the three maids and said that they were all fired, and they would not receive letters of recommendation. The maids looked at the young lady in horror. A moment later, they threw themselves at her feet and begged for forgiveness. A few minutes later, the head maid came into the room and told them to stop. The head maid approached the young lady and apologized for not coming out to meet her, as she had not been notified of the young lady's arrival. Laura was shaking with fear in front of the housekeeper behind the young lady. The young lady looked at the maid and asked what kind of box she had in her hands, and also told her to give it to her. The maid looked at the young lady in fear and asked if this was really an appeal to her. Ethel knew that it seemed like they were going to have a serious conversation and she would have to defend herself. She took the box and turned it on. The housekeeper looked at the young lady and said that this was a magical artifact and it was intended as a gift for Lady Lena. Ethel smiled and said that she would give her this gift herself. She said that she was planning to visit the capital anyway. The ruler bowed and said that it was she who ordered the portraits of the young lady to be hung in her chambers. The housekeeper looked at the young lady and said that if she wanted to punish someone because of this incident, then she could punish her. The housekeeper was also Lena's nanny, and she was Lena's strongest ally in the house. The young lady looked at the housekeeper and asked what right she had to fire her maid and also beat her. Laura looked at the young lady very frightened. The housekeeper looked at the young lady in surprise and asked what she was talking about. The housekeeper said that it was her direct duty to manage the maids. The young lady said angrily that it was not so since only she was her mistress and had the right to punish or dismiss her. Ethel was told by the housekeeper that she could only ask her permission. Ethel looked at her with contempt and said that her orders did not extend to her personal servants. Ethel asked how a housekeeper could know such simple rules. She said she couldn't understand how Lena could have considered her a suitable candidate for the position. The housekeeper angrily shouted at the young lady not to dare question Lady Lena's decision. The housekeeper said that it was true that she had some power in this house, but that did not mean that she was the mistress of the house. Ethel said that her husband was the eldest son of Duke Cassius. She said that besides, the Duchess had long since left this world, and may she rest in peace. She looked at her and asked who in her opinion was the mistress of this estate. The housekeeper shouted angrily that the owner of this estate was Lady Lena. Ethel looked at her with disdain and said that she seemed to have forgotten the rules and traditions. Ethel said that she would be the mistress here even if her mother-in-law were alive, because her husband was the official owner of this estate. The housekeeper looked at the young lady with disdain and a smirk and said that it seemed she was not yet aware. She said that the one who was in charge of their estate was the one who had the key to the family treasury. The housekeeper said with a sarcastic grin that the key was kept by Lady Lena, the sole and exclusive mistress of this house. Duke Cassius personally handed the key to the treasury to Lena. The Duke looked at his daughter and said with a smile that she was very smart but very young, but he was still sure that she could handle the household chores. Ethel knew that the Duke did this out of personal sympathy. The Duke looked at everyone present and said that anyone who was against this decision could remain silent, otherwise he would take action. After the wedding, she tried to take on the responsibilities of the housewife. She said with a smile that now she would manage the household affairs. But the young lady in turn smiled and told her sister not to worry, as she didn't have to do that at all. The Duke and his brothers praised their young sister. They were delighted with her because she thought of her sister. The young lady in turn was shocked by this, since she knew that the young lady still had a very hard life in luxury and in a house full of servants. The housekeeper looked at the young lady with a smirk and said that she had no right to punish or fire anyone from the servants. Ethel now knew what motives were behind those words. The young lady looked at them with rage and said that they were openly mocking her, and it was very impudent of them. She said that she would certainly tell her husband about their disrespectful behavior. The housekeeper told the young lady with a fierce grin that the young master had also agreed that it would be better to entrust the management of the house to his sister. Ethel was very pleased, as the confession was successfully recorded with the help of a magical artifact. She knew that this recording would serve as an important argument in court against her husband. She had proof that Lena had deliberately taken the place of mistress of the estate, which was rightfully intended for her, and also that her husband had not objected to this in any way, and had even encouraged such an outrage. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she understood everything, and that there was no way she could take any action against her at all. The housekeeper said with a grin that this was indeed the case, and yet her name was higher in status, so her attitude towards the young lady remained respectful. The young lady sighed heavily and, turning around, said that the housekeeper could do whatever she wanted and that she was now going to her room. Ethel turned around and smiled and wished little Percy a happy birthday, who in turn barked playfully. Milady knew that if it weren't for his birthday, the magical voice recorder invented by the aesthetic scientist would not have been here. She knew that the scientist was another of Lena's many allies, whom she had acquired through memories from the past. She sponsors his activities, and in return receives valuable artifacts such as this voice recorder. Ethel knew that sometimes Lena wrote down important events on it, like the birthday of her beloved little boy Percy. The housekeeper ran furiously after the young lady, shouting at her to urge her on. Ethel, opening the doors to the room, froze in place. She was shocked by what she saw. Her chambers were lined with portraits of Lena. Ethel was furious. The young lady looked at the housekeeper with surprise and a grin and asked if all this was really a gift to her. The housekeeper said that she had hung the last works for an artist who was patronized by the Duke. The young lady said with a grin that although she was not the mistress of this house, she could still do whatever she wanted with the gifts, and she shouted to the maids to take them off immediately. The young lady looked at all the portraits that were in the room in anger and ordered the maids to destroy them. The housekeeper was shocked by what she heard. She looked at the young lady and asked what they should do with them. Terence stepped on one of the portraits and said with a smirk that he would now show them what they needed to do with the portraits. The housekeeper was shocked by what the young man did. The young lady looked at them and asked if they themselves did not understand how much they had insulted Lady Lena. Ethel asked with fury how it was possible to hang such worthless canvases on the wall. Ethel asked them if they thought it was possible to convey the beauty of the young lady with paints. She asked them if they really couldn't see the difference between her real self and these portraits, and she said, puzzled, that of course the real lady was more beautiful. The housekeeper said that no picture could ever capture the full charm of their lady. Ethel said that all these portraits were just a ridiculous attempt to copy the unique beauty of their real young lady. The housekeeper said that was the point of painting, to try to convey it. Ethel looked at her and asked if she really thought so. She asked if she really thought that these simple sketches represented my lady properly. Ethel asked furiously why they hadn't already been busy destroying them. She didn't understand why they were silent and didn't answer. Laura and Terence stood frozen in shock and bewilderment. The housekeeper looked at the young lady and asked her forgiveness for what she had said. Ethel said with a smile that part of her wanted to gather up all the paintings in the house right now and burn them in one big bonfire, but she was in a good mood today. All the servants humbly thanked her for her kindness. The young lady smiled and said that she was taking charge of the duties of the executor of this terrible sin, and now she intended to destroy at least those paintings that she had with her. Laura in turn threw the painting against the wall with a crash. She said that the vicious images needed to be destroyed immediately. The housekeeper was shocked by what she saw. The housekeeper looked at the young lady and begged her to stop and not do this. The young lady was surprised, looked at her, and asked if she was really suggesting to leave these sinful pictures on the walls. She asked if the young lady meant nothing to them. The housekeeper said that she was wrong and that it was she who asked the artists to paint portraits to hang in her chambers. The maids asked the young lady for forgiveness. The housekeeper said that she simply could not watch her destroy the image of her young mistress, and even more so, she could not participate in this. She wanted to get punished better. The young lady sighed heavily and said that, unfortunately, she did not have the status of the mistress of the estate, so she had no right to punish her. The housekeeper apologized to the young lady and said that she was of course the mistress of the estate. They wanted to receive an appropriate punishment. Instead of the young lady touching the portraits of their mistress, Ethel looked at them with contempt and said that they should not apologize to her. She said to Ethel that they had unfairly fired and punished her maid, and if she did not forgive them after the apology, then she would not forgive them either. A moment later, all the servants came up to Laura and asked her for forgiveness with tears in their eyes. Ethel quietly told Terence that this was not typical behavior for her, and he said with surprise and a smile that he did not even know that she idolized Lady Lena so much. Ethel looked at him and asked with a smile if he really enjoyed teasing her. The young man smiled and said that he did like him a little. A moment later, he smiled and said that he really enjoyed teasing her. The young lady pouted cutely and shyly as she looked at him. The lady looked at the housekeeper and said that she now had to get down to her duties, and she kicked her out of the room. "Young lady, you began to collect all your jewelry in a hurry." A moment later, they began to quietly leave the mansion so that no one would notice them. She knew that she would not return to this estate again. She looked at her friends and said that they would now go out through the hole. A moment later, she heard a familiar voice. The butler greeted her. He looked at the young lady with a smile and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Ethel was surprised as she did not expect to see a butler in front of her. She wondered if he had been waiting for them in this place. The butler, looking at the young lady, smiled and said that it reminded him of the first day they met. He said that she then said that this castle was very beautiful. The young lady looked at him sharply and said that she understood that he seemed to be aware of the divorce. The butler looked at her and said that the young lord and the duke had mentioned the incident. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked if he was really going to call the guards now to prevent her from escaping. This, under any circumstances, he said that he only came to say goodbye to her. The young lady was surprised, as she did not expect to hear such a thing. She said that it was still unknown whether she would be able to get a divorce. She said that it was too early to say goodbye. The butler smiled and bowed submissively. He said that regardless of the outcome of the trial, her heart no longer belonged to this house. A moment later, she heard a crash and hurried her friends. As she ran away from the estate, the young lady glanced for a moment at the butler who was staring after her, and she was very glad that he did not stop her. The Marquise looked at the young lady and said that they now needed to go to the station. Ethel looked at him with a sharp gaze and asked him to wait a little. The young lady was surprised and puzzled, wondering why the butler had let them go so easily. Ethel knew that he had served the Cassius family faithfully and truly for many years, and he had come to the house when he was still very young. During the days she spent at the estate, the butler sometimes invited her to tea. They did not discuss anything like that, and yet these were joyful moments. The Marquis thought for a moment and said that perhaps he was the only one in this house who had at least a drop of common sense, and that was why he took care of her. Laura smiled and said that it was all true since he also took care of her. The young lady was surprised as she did not expect to hear from Laura that the butler took care of her. Laura smiled and said that when the young lady was out, he was always sending her on errands into town so she could go out and about, and he also gave her pocket money. Ethel thought for a moment and said that she needed to talk to him immediately. Ethel, if she could get him as a witness, someone who had been with the Cassiuses from the beginning, Ethel knew that it would be very useful and it would help in court. Laura smiled and said that she knew his address at home as she had been there on errands. Lavra smiled and introduced Miss Guerson as the head maid in the butler's house. Laura said that the butler's wife had died long ago, so they must not under any circumstances confuse them. Laura looked at the head maid and said with a smile that the butler had asked her to bring them the leftovers from the table. The maid smiled and said that now she and Joshua would definitely have their fill. The young lady looked at the head maid in surprise as she had not heard of Joshua. Before the head maid was taken aback and asked for forgiveness, she said that she forgot to offer them tea. The Marquis leaned closer to the young lady and quietly asked who Joshua was. The young lady knew that this was the name of the butler's only son. He was mentioned in the novel only once in childhood. Joshua fell in love with Lena at first sight and decided to give her a homemade figurine as a gift. The Duke who witnessed this scene was simply furious, and from then on every young man who showed interest in the young lady found himself in the epicenter of a scandal. The young lady knew that it was not surprising that the crown prince was different from Lena, since it was only because of his high status that he was allowed to do so. The head maid smiled and said that she had made them some tea. The young lady noticed that when Joshua was mentioned, Miss quickly changed the subject. Ethel was still interested in what was going on. A moment later, she saw the beautiful carvings that were standing on the shelf. The Miss smiled and said that these were the young master's beautiful works. The Marquise pointed to one of the figurines and said with a smile that it looked particularly skillfully made. Ethel realized that it was obviously the work of the young master. A moment later, they heard a noise. Joshua came down to them and asked the Miss if the guests had left yet, and also asked who it was. The young people froze in bewilderment as they saw Joshua. The young man looked at them intently and was very frightened. He was trembling with fear, but a moment later he ran to his room. The young people froze in bewilderment as they did not expect to see such a spectacle. Miss sighed heavily and asked, puzzled, what to do now. The Miss said that Joshua is the master's son, and he experienced a traumatic event as a child and is now afraid to leave the house. The Miss looked at the Marquis and said that this time it was especially bad, probably because he saw the weapon. The Marquis looked at her in surprise and asked if she was talking about his sword. Miss said that Joshua was afraid to touch any kind of bladed weapons, even a kitchen knife. Ethel asked in surprise if he was afraid of balls. The Miss looked at them and said that he had a phobia. She did not have time to finish when suddenly the butler flew into the room. He looked at them with fury and asked what they were doing here. The butler looked at the unexpected guests with fury and asked why they had not warned him of their visit. He said that it was very improper of them. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked why he was so afraid. She asked if he had something to hide or if he had something to be ashamed of. The butler looked at the Miss and, sighing heavily, said that she could go. The Miss smiled and said that she would leave them immediately. The butler sat down on the sofa and, sighing heavily, said that he had not tried to hide his son and was not at all ashamed of him. The young lady looked at the butler intently and said that it was not about his son, but about his irresponsibility. The butler looked at her in surprise and asked if she had just called him irresponsible. Ethel looked at the butler and said that it was true since he was serving a man who had deeply injured his son, and it was extremely irresponsible on his part. The butler was shocked. He didn't know where she got this information from. In a trembling voice, he said that it was an accident. The young lady looked at the butler intently and said that it was not an accident. As the Duke had deliberately aimed the blades of the ball at the little boy, the Marquise and Laura were shocked by what they heard. The butler said the Duke saw Joshua trying to give a gift to his daughter. The Duke was furious. He found his sword and pointed it at the small, defenseless child. The Duke could not understand how the boy dared to do something like that. Lena tried to stop him so it didn't come to bloodshed, but unfortunately, Joshua's first love turned into an unforgettable nightmare for his entire life. Every time he saw the young lady, the butler remembered his frightened and sickly son. The butler wept, and with a trembling voice said that he still had to leave the Cassiuses. He knew that he could not ignore what had happened to his son. But he knew that he had given his best years, his entire youth, to this family, and besides, the Duke was not a villain at all. He often helped the weak. The Duke said that his castle is a place where everyone, regardless of status, will find their happiness. The butler, looking at those present, said that he also could not leave, because the Duke would not forgive his betrayal, and he would not leave them alone. The young lady sighed heavily and said that it was a very sad story, but still she hoped that he would be able to testify in court against the Duke. Yulia didn't say that, however, in case he still had warm feelings towards his son. If he wants to get an official apology from the Duke and a chance to cure his son, he can visit her. The young lady came closer to the butler and said that he could contact her through a lawyer. She looked at him and said with a soft smile that he had already spent his entire life serving the Duke, but it was not too late to spend the rest of his life with a happy and healthy son. The young lady smiled and said that their last train had already left, so they would have to spend the night at a hotel. She smiled and said that she wanted to treat them. The young lady, in turn, knew that at the end of the story, all the villains are left with nothing, and the main character lives happily surrounded by equally happy friends. But still, the young lady wondered if Ethel from the novel was really happy. She was very much touched by the story of the butler with his son. She did not know if there could really be many such stories in this novel. The next day at the station, Ethel looked at the man in surprise. She was surprised, but at the same time happy. The young lady looked at her companions and said with a smile that she would now go and talk to the butler, and they could go for now. The Marquis agreed with her. The butler looked at the young lady and asked if there was a way to cure his son. The young lady smiled a warm smile at the godfather's palace and said that the capital's doctors were saying that they were looking for ways to treat such ailments with a combination of medications and mental health counseling. The butler said, heavily sighing, that all these years he had hidden his son from the world because he did not know what he could do. The butler asked if they really had a chance to get an apology. The young lady looked at him and said that as he had said earlier that the Duke was not a villain, no matter how his daughter came into the house, he only thought about her happiness. The butler sighed heavily and said that he wished everything could go back to the way it was. The maid looked at her mistress and said that the train was leaving any minute. The butler looked at the young lady and said that he had not made a final decision, yet the young lady smiled softly at him and said that it was okay, he could just contact her whenever he decided. In turn, the palace bowed defiantly to the young lady in farewell. The young lady looked at the Marquis with a smile and asked how he was. The Marquis smiled and said that he felt the perfect taste. The Marquis was surprised. He wondered why it always tasted different. He said that he probably would never get it right. The young lady smiled and asked if talent was really needed in this business. She was very glad that she and the Marquis met every morning and evening to drink tea together. The Marquis looked at the young lady and said that he had some business today that he could not put off, so he unfortunately would not be able to accompany her to the lawyer's office. He timidly asked for forgiveness. The young lady smiled and said that it was no big deal. The Marquis smiled and said that he had, however, found himself a deputy. The young lady looked at him in bewilderment. Sharon looked at the young lady in surprise and asked if this was her new bodyguard. The girl introduced herself and said that her name was Venetta and that she would be temporarily acting as Lady Ethel's bodyguard. Sharon looked at Venetta intently and asked if she had studied at the academy. Sharon said that she seemed to have seen her there. Venetta smiled and said that it was exactly like that, and the Marquis appreciated her potential and supported her. Vanetta looked at the young lady and told her not to think anything unnecessary since their son and the Marquis had a purely working relationship. Ethel smiled and said that she did not think anything unnecessary. She knew that everyone in the villa was too kind to her. She knew that she shouldn't imagine anything since their relationship was a little different. A moment later, a young man entered their room and asked for forgiveness. The young man said that Duke Cassius the Younger had come to see them. The young lady looked at her husband in surprise and asked why he had come. The young man looked at his wife and said, puzzled, that she saw that she hired a decent lawyer and probably the lawyer costs a lot of money. He said that he saw that she did not skimp. She was surprised, looked at him and asked what he wanted. The young man looked at her with a grin and said that this was all his money before the wedding. She had nothing to her name except those abandoned mines. The young lady looked at him with a smirk and asked if he really wanted to take her own gifts away from her. Now she looked at him with contempt and said that this was really mean of him. Leandro was shocked by his wife's statement. He looked at her and asked where she lived. Now the young lady sighed heavily and looking at him said that it was better for him not to know this information. He sighed heavily and said that he was already fed up with all this and could barely contain himself. Ethel looked at him in surprise and asked why he was holding back. She was furious because she was the only one who had to hold back from yelling at him. He looked at her with fury and shouted. He asked how she could take all the portraits of his sister off the wall. He said that she was very upset about it. He said that his sister now thinks that she hates her and is in despair about it. The young man said that after such an incident his father would never take her back. Even if she cried and begged for forgiveness, she was a little shocked by what she heard, but still knew that she did not even want to go back. The young man said that his sister was able to persuade the Duke to give her a second chance. Leandro said that Lena is simply an incredibly good girl and simply an angel incarnate. The young man said that his father had a lot of things to do now and was very busy. Leandro told Ethel not to cause him trouble and to apologize to him urgently. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she was not going to do it. The young man looked at her in surprise and asked if it was really that difficult for her to do it. The young lady turned around angrily and looking sideways at her husband said that this was the reason she had filed for divorce. Leandro said, puzzled, that their butler had disappeared, leaving a leave slip on his desk. The young lady looked at her husband and asked, "What about his son?" Leandro sighed heavily and said that he seemed to remember that the butler had a son. The young man said that, to tell the truth, they had never exchanged 2 words and he had probably been living somewhere far away for a long time. The young lady looked at him with disdain and said that it was not that simple. The butler did not want to tell them anything about his son. The young man said that it was not true and he did not believe her since the butler was like family to them. He had served them for decades. The young lady thought for a moment and remembered Ethel knew that she and the butler had never been family to them. She didn't know if he had decided to come over to her side, but at least she knew one thing: he hadn't ignored her words like so many others before him. The young man frowned for a moment and thinking said that his father suspected that the butler simply needed a vacation. The young lady knew that he could continue his lies as much as he wanted, but she did not want to listen to him any longer. Turning around, she said that it was time for her to leave. The young man shouted to his wife to stop as she needed to go with him. Ethel looked at him in surprise and asked why she suddenly needed to go with him. Since she didn't want any of this, he said that he had reserved a table at the hotel restaurant. Ethel said that they had nothing more to talk about. He looked at her and said with a smile that he wanted her to talk to someone other than him. Leandro said with a smirk on his face that Countess Valet wanted to see her. The young lady thought for a moment and frowned, surprised that the Countess wanted to see her. In the novel, the real Ethel was a hard-working girl from an impoverished noble family. She doubted that the relatives who sold her to the Duke would be happy to learn that she was going to leave her husband. She knew that her family would not allow such a turn of events, but still she knew that now it would be she who would speak to them and not the real Ethel. The young lady looked at the young man intently and, agreeing, said that she would go with him. He was very happy, and his face changed. A moment later, they were slowly walking to the restaurant. Leandro returned, looked at the lady he had found, and asked who was walking next to her. Ethel looked at him with surprise and anger and asked if he couldn't tell. She said that her bodyguards were next to her. The young man smiled contentedly and said that he was very glad that she had finally come to her senses and fired that persistent boy who had been next to her last time. He smiled and said that she was a good girl. When they were walking in the restaurant, everyone was whispering. Everyone present was surprised because rumors had spread that the couple wanted to get divorced. People did not understand why they were walking together. Sometime later, entering the room, the young lady saw her mother. The Countess smiled and called her daughter. The Countess ran up to her daughter and said with a smile that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. She smiled and said that she would like to admire her daughter. Vinetta blocked the Countess's path and told her to stop. She said that the Countess could not approach Milady without her permission. The Countess was surprised. She said that she was her mother. Vinetta looked at the Countess and said with disdain that there were no exceptions for anyone. She said that first the Countess must ask permission from the young lady. Leandro looked at the maid and shouted for her to know her place as it was none of her business. Ethel looked at her husband and told him to shut up already. The young man looked at her in bewilderment as he did not expect to hear such a thing. The Countess looked at the young Duke and said that she was all right. She said with a smile that she saw that her daughter was well accompanied. The Countess smiled and told her daughter that she had missed her very much. She said that she was very glad that she could see her daughter and hug her. Ethel looked at the Countess and said that they would do better without hugging. The Countess looked at her daughter with bewilderment as she did not expect such an attitude on her part. The young lady looked hard at her mother and said she did not want Ethel to come near her at all, the Duchess told her. Leandro looked at his wife and shouted angrily for her to stop as she could not speak so casually to her mother. The young lady approached her mother and told the Countess that from that day on she would have no connection with their family. The Countess turned pale before her eyes and in a trembling voice asked her daughter what she was talking about. The Countess told her daughter that if something was bothering her, she could tell her everything. The young lady looked at the Countess with disdain and said that she would no longer lend her money and she would not pay off their debts at all. The young man looked at his wife with bewilderment and shock and called her. The Countess looked at her daughter with fury and shouted at her to shut her mouth. Leandro looked at the Countess with bewilderment and shock. He was very surprised because he did not expect such a thing from her. Countess, you in turn realized that you made a mistake in front of the young master. She faked a smile and apologized for getting excited. The young lady looked angrily at the Countess, for now she saw what discipline she usually gave Ethel, and she thought it was simply dreadful of the Countess. The Countess looked at the young gentleman and asked if he would leave her alone with her daughter, as she would like to talk to her. The young man smiled submissively and said that of course he would leave them alone. The Countess said that their daughter usually does not behave like this, as she is a sweet and submissive girl. The young man looked at the Countess and told her not to worry. He said with a smile that very soon the young lady will realize all her mistakes and regret the words that she said to the Countess. Leandro gave the young lady a smirk and told her she could speak to the Countess a moment later. He left, leaving them alone. The Countess looked at the bodyguards and told her to go out too and leave them. Vinetta looked angrily at the Countess and said that she would under no circumstances leave them alone. The Countess smiled and said that she would just like to talk to her daughter without strangers. A moment later, the Countess looked at the young man in surprise. She asked in surprise who he was and where he came from in the room, since he had not been there before. The young man smiled and said that he was just an errand boy. He said that they had gone out into the hall together earlier. He smiled a timid smile and asked if she hadn't noticed him. Before leaving the lawyer's office, Sharon told Milady to take Robbie with her. She said that usually people don't notice him, but he is very quiet and calm and fits in everything, and if something needs to be done, you can just tell him. The Countess looked at them with fury and said that it did not matter, and they could just leave as she wanted to talk to her daughter. The young lady looked at everyone present and said that they were not leaving. For some time after the battle of glances continued and the atmosphere in the room was tense. The Countess sat down and with a feigned smile asked her daughter to sit at the table. She said that they could just have lunch and chat as the food was very tasty. The young lady was wary of the Countess. She saw that her tone had changed in an instant. In the novel, little Ethel was kept afloat only by rare moments of tenderness from her mother. She hugged her daughter tenderly and said with a soft smile that she was the only one who understood her mother. The young lady thought she had worked hard enough. She hoped she would be loved as much as her brother. The young lady did not know that the former Ethel had disappeared long ago, and in her place was now she who was not at all like her, the timid young lady. Ethel. I looked at the Countess and said that if this was all she could offer her, then she was leaving. The Countess looked furiously at her daughter and shouted at her to sit down immediately. The Countess shouted that she was an ill-mannered girl. The Countess asked if she really had married the Duke's son and imagined herself to be God knows what. Venetta covered the young lady with her body and told her to take a step back. The young lady looked sideways at the little boy who was near the door. The Countess shouted at her daughter that she in turn was behaving very presumptuously. The young lady looked at her mother and said that she had abandoned her to come, so she should stop showering her with accusations. She said with fury that she had fed her, given her drink, clothed her, and put shoes on her, and she should be grateful to her for everything. The young lady looked at the Countess and said that giving food, clothing, and blood to a child was the duty of any mother. She told the Countess that she did not always manage even this properly. The Countess turned pale before her eyes and asked her daughter what she was talking about. Ethel looked at the Countess and said that after her wedding she and her father had not even visited her. She knew that in any case it was all for money to sponsor Samuel's business. Ethel looked at the Countess and said that she got the money from her husband, not from them, so she didn't owe them anything. She shouted out of guilt that she just didn't understand. The Countess said that her husband showered her with money, and she just couldn't lend the family a little. The Countess screamed furiously. How could her daughter file for divorce? The Countess was furious. She did not understand how they would now have to return all the money overnight. The Countess said that she heard the Duke was beside himself with anger, and now their family was finished. Milady looked at the Countess in surprise and asked what of it Ethel had said about the Countess, that this was a debt, that sooner or later it would have to be repaid, and this also applied to debts to the Duke's family. The Countess looked at her daughter with bewilderment and said that she did not at all understand how serious everything was. The Countess said that they could all end up on the street any day now. The young lady's son looked at the Countess with disdain and said that for that very reason they should not have borrowed money if they could not pay it back on time. The Countess was in shock, and in a trembling voice she told Ethel that she was her mother after all. The Countess was shocked and did not understand how her daughter dared to treat her like that. The Countess pounced on her with a scream and asked her daughter if she understood what she owed to her mother. Venetta grabbed the Countess with lightning speed and twisted her. The Countess screamed at her to let her go. Right now, the Countess screamed at her daughter that she gave birth to her, and she raised her, and Ethel could not treat her so cruelly. The young lady in turn swung her arm to strike. The Countess was in shock looking at her daughter. She froze, expecting a blow. But a moment later, the young lady slapped herself on the cheek. Ethel banged against the door and begged her mother not to do it. The Countess looked at her daughter in bewilderment. She was shocked by what she saw. A moment later, the young lady fell to the ground with a crash. Venetta ran hastily to her mistress and called her. Leandro burst into the room and asked angrily what was going on. Leandro was surprised and stunned. He saw his poor wife lying on the ground. He looked at them in shock and asked what this all meant. The young lady looked at her mother with tears in her eyes and said that this was too much of her. Ethel screamed at her mother that all this time she had made her do the laundry, cook for the whole family, wash the dishes and clean up, and even made Ethel mend her dresses and took all her money. Robbie asked in surprise if the Countess had really shifted all these matters onto her only daughter, that they were still considered noble ladies, but even commoners do not act so brazenly towards their children. Ethel, looking at the Countess, said that even if she did all this, the Countess beat her on the hands and feet. The Countess froze in place from shock. Robbie shouted very loudly that the Countess had beaten her own daughter, and that it was simply terrible of her. Ethel said with tears in her eyes that she had not wanted to get married at all, but her mother had forced her to do it. Robbie shouted that it was just a nightmare, and the young lady was forced into marriage a moment later. Everyone picked up on the rumors and said that they felt sorry for the poor and unfortunate girl who was forced into marriage. The young lady looked at the boy in surprise, as he had brought her husband and a whole crowd of onlookers to boot. She was glad she noticed that he was a very brave and smart boy. Shortly before this, outside the door of the room, the young man looked at the young gentleman and said that it seemed to him that something bad might happen in the room. He asked the young gentleman to go and check everything. Robbie shouted very loudly to the young gentleman that Lady Cassius was behind the door. He shouted that some trouble might happen to the young lady. The young man looked at his wife with bewilderment and asked if she had been forced to marry him. Ethel, with tears in her eyes, said that she did not want to tie herself in marriage to a stranger because she was afraid of Duke Cassius the Younger, but she was told that she was obliged to marry him to pay off the family debts. Everyone started whispering and saying that the Countess and her family were up to their eyeballs in debt. They were shocked that they had sold their daughter. People were talking and feeling sorry for the young lady, since in fact her parents had forced her to marry someone she didn't love. The Countess looked at her daughter with bewilderment and said that this was all untrue since she loved her daughter very much. Ethel screamed that her entire family was constantly driving her crazy, and there was nothing she could do about it. Everyone present was in shock because they heard a simply terrible story. They said that the Countess's family should be ashamed. The Countess was in shock, looking at everyone present. She said that everything was not so. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she no longer wanted to obey her mother's will. She declared publicly that from that moment on, she refused to belong to the Valley's family. Vanetta applied ice to the young lady's swollen cheek. Ethel winced as it hurt her a lot. Vanetta looked at the young lady and said that she had hit herself too hard. Vanetta was a lady and asked with a smile if she had achieved what she wanted. Ethel smiled contentedly and said that everything had gone smoothly and precisely according to her plan. The Countess looked at her daughter with bewilderment and asked what she was saying now. Leandro looked at the Countess with a stern gaze and told her to leave the room immediately. Robbie, with lightning speed, made sure that the Countess immediately left the room. The young gentleman approached his wife and timidly said that he did not know that she had gone through such a thing. Ethel looked angrily at her husband and said that in her opinion he was not particularly interested in learning the details of her life. She looked at him and asked if he hadn't noticed at all that her family had never visited her. Ethel asked if he thought she had gone out of her way to avoid them. She looked at him and said angrily that of course he didn't notice anything since he was busy all the time and didn't pay attention to her. The young gentleman looked at her with a sad look, but didn't answer. Vanetta looked at the young lady with a smile and said that there was one last crisis to overcome. The young lady looked at Vanetta in surprise and asked what latest crisis she was talking about. Vanetta only sighed heavily. Ethel looked at the Marquis and said with a smile that they were already back. The Marquis greeted them with a smile. The Marquis looked at the young lady and froze in bewilderment. He was shocked because he saw her swollen face. The young lady looked at him in bewilderment and asked what was the matter. The Marquis came closer to her and touching her cheek angrily asked, "Who did it?" Ethel timidly looked away, not knowing how to explain everything to him. The Marquis looked at her with fury and angrily asked who had done this to her. The Marquis looked at Vanetta and said with fury that he had ordered her to make sure that no one laid a finger on the young lady. Vanetta fell on her knee and asked for forgiveness. She said that she was entirely to blame. The young lady looked at the Marquis with a puzzled expression and said that it was not her fault and everything was fine. The Marquis looked at her with fury and said that she could just name the person who did this to her. Ethel screamed that it was her. She said she hit herself. The Marquis looked at the young lady in bewilderment. He did not understand what she was talking about. The Marquis sighed heavily and said that he now understood how everything had happened. A moment later, his expression changed, and he said with a smile that it was an excellent plan. Ethel smiled shyly and said that Vanetta didn't know about her plan, and it wasn't her fault. Vanetta sighed heavily and said that it was not so, and she was really guilty. The young lady looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. Vanetta said that she, in turn, was unable to dissuade the young lady from using this plan, and as a result, my lady suffered even at her own hand. Vanetta said that she was unable to protect the young lady. Ethel was amazed. Looking at Vanetta, she saw that she was a very reliable and responsible person. The Marquis looked at them and said with a smile that if they had not yet had dinner, he invited them all to sit down at the table together. The young lady looked closely at the Marquis and said that he looked worried. She asked what was troubling him, so he looked at her in surprise, asked if it wasn't obvious. He said he was worried about them. The young lady looked at him in bewilderment and asked why he was worried about them. He sighed heavily and said that there were attacks and he was worried about them since they were partners. The young lady looked at him in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. He sighed heavily and looked away in embarrassment, saying that they needed each other. She thought for a moment and said, looking at the Marquis, that he really was helping her a lot. The Marquis smiled and said that she had also helped him a lot. Ethel said that she had only promised to thank him with a recipe for medicinal tea. Ethel smiled and said that if he couldn't do it, she would teach one of his confidants how to make tea properly. The Marquis looked at her and said with a smile that this was exactly what he wanted to discuss with her, but first he wanted them to eat together. The young lady and the Marquis dined together and entered into a pleasant and easy conversation. Late in the evening, the young lady was leisurely strolling around the estate. The Marquis looked at the door in surprise as he saw a young lady who had come to him. The young lady in turn was surprised as she did not expect to see the Marquis at such a late hour. The Marquis looked at her and asked if she was embarrassed to call him Terror. The young lady timidly said that she had somehow not consciously called him. She said that surely not everyone here knew who he really was. She smiled and said that she would always call him Terror, and he, in turn, would simply call her Ethel. The Marquis looked at the young lady with a smile and called her name several times. The young lady was embarrassed that he called her by name. Ethel took a sip of wine with lightning speed. She wondered why she suddenly felt so awkward. The Marquis looked at her and asked how her cheek was. The young lady smiled and said that everything was fine now, and the healing ointment and cold compress had helped her well. The Marquis looked closely at the young lady and said that she had better take care of herself. He asked how she was feeling. Terence said that it must have been difficult for her to break away from her family. The young lady looked at the Marquis and said with a smile that everything was not so and that she was fine. The Marquis looked at her and said that his father's wife hated him. He said that if he could, he would have broken up with them long ago. The young lady looked at him intently and said that his situation was still much more serious. He smiled and said that it seemed to him that they were in about the same circumstances. The young lady smiled, looking at the Marquis. A moment later, she thanked him for his words of sympathy towards her. The museum said that they were still partners and should help each other. She was amazed by the fact that she felt much more comfortable with the Marquis than with her husband Leandro. Although they had only met a month ago, the Marquis looked at her and asked if she had thought about what she would do after the divorce. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she hadn't really thought about it yet. She thought that she would most likely leave the empire. The Marquis looked at her in shock and asked what she was talking about, as he did not expect to hear something like that. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she had been through a lot here, and besides, every resident of the empire was now aware of the details of her personal life. But still, she never wanted to cross paths with the Duke's family again. Lena will marry the crown prince and become the beloved princess of the empire, and she will of course drag the entire Cassius family along with her. The Duke, in turn, will rise as never before. She knew that after this, her family, the Valleys, would definitely not give her a normal life. She wanted to escape to another country and start a new life with the money from the mine. She still wanted to invite a few of her friends with her, if they of course wanted to go with her. But she still knew that the person closest to her now was the one sitting opposite her. Ethel looked at the Marquis in surprise as she saw his upset expression. She asked if he was upset about something. The Marquis asked in surprise if she was really going to leave the empire. The young lady asked for forgiveness and said that it seemed she should have told him about it earlier. He sighed heavily and said that she shouldn't apologize for it. The Marquis smiled and said that he simply thought that he was more important to her than he actually was. He said that the realization had just come to him. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. He smiled and said he would like to propose a toast. The Marquis said he would like to drink to their cooperation. The young lady smiled and supported his toast. She said that she would be happy to drink to their cooperation. She smiled and said that they would definitely achieve their goals together. Ethel smiled and said that she hoped that he would also achieve what he wanted. The Marquis looked at her in surprise and asked what she thought he wanted. She thought that he most likely wanted to get rid of the crown prince and become the emperor. She looked at him and timidly asked if he really wanted to become the crown prince. The young man sighed heavily and said that he himself actually didn't know this yet, but it was time for him to ask himself this question. Ethel smiled and said she was sure he would find a purpose in life in the future. Terence looked hard at the young lady and said that if she said so, he would certainly believe her. Ethel sighed heavily and said that divorce was still a complicated matter. Sharon looked at her and asked if it was really that difficult for her. Sharon told the young lady that she could step out for a while and clear her head. The young lady smiled and asked if she really could do that. Robbie burst into the room and said that there was a letter for the lady. The young lady was surprised because there was no sender's name on the letter. Did the one who sent the letter fulfill someone's request? Robbie said that he also asked me to tell her that she would understand everything when she read the letter. The young lady looked at the letter in surprise. A moment later, she said in a hurry that she had to leave immediately. The young lady walked slowly towards the butler. The young lady did not come very close to him. She quietly asked if their meeting in the capital was too dangerous. The butler said that it had been a long time since he retired, but he was the one who taught everything to the Duke's subordinates, and asked if she could make such an answer. The young lady smiled and said that she would sound convincing on his part. She smiled and asked how his son was doing. The butler smiled softly and told the young lady that she was very kind-hearted. She looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. He smiled and said that the first thing she asked was how his son was doing, not whether he would be a witness in the divorce trial. He smiled and said that his son was doing well, and on the night of their departure, he asked his son if he would like to undergo treatment in the capital. The butler said that only then did he realize how foolish it had been of him to leave this child on the Duke's land. He said that his child with such a kind heart just continued to sit there without saying a word. The young lady smiled softly and said that if she were in his son's place, she would be immensely happy that her father was making important decisions in his favor, even if it was only now. The butler looked at her in surprise and asked if it was really her father who pretended not to see anything. The young lady said that his son believed in him and gained courage. As they sat and chatted casually, the butler saw a man playing with his son. A moment later, the butler spoke of the proposal made to the young lady last time. The young lady looked at the butler in surprise, since she still doubted until the very end that he would help her. Dvoretsky smiled and asked if there were any more seats on the stand for witnesses. The young lady cried out in joy that of course there was. She realized her mistake and quickly closed her mouth. The young lady in turn was very angry, wondering if he had really said something like that. The young gentleman looked at the butler and said that he thought he was wrong. He said that even before marriage he fell in love with the young lady and thought it was love. But now he doesn't see her as the woman of his dreams and doesn't see a woman at all. The young lady in turn shouted that her sympathy also did not reach the level of love, and she simply read the novel and she liked it. From the description, she shouted that it was just interest and nothing more. She was furious because she knew she looked very ridiculous in his eyes. The young lady looked at the butler and asked if he could testify about what he had just said in court. The butler sighed heavily and said that he intended to tell the truth about everything he had seen and heard. The young lady knew that if she took care of this, she would be at a loss herself. But thanks to the incident, she had a valuable witness in her hands. A moment later, a young man ran past her and told her to buy a newspaper. Vanetta blocked the young man's way. The young lady looked at her bodyguard in surprise. A moment later, she told her that everything was fine and there was no need to worry about such things. I looked at the boy and asked if he would give her a copy of the newspaper. The boy told her, "Nalady," that she could not even imagine how interesting the news about the Duke's eldest son had come out. The young lady was shocked. She wondered why the article was on the front page of the newspaper she read about her divorce, and also that her husband did not want a divorce, yes, how much he loved his wife. Her husband also ordered an advertisement with an apology. She was furious because she knew that everyone thought he was a loving husband. After reading the newspaper, everyone said that she was just a terrible and disgusting wife. The bodyguard looked at the young lady and called her. Ethel laughed furiously at the paper and said that he was fine with her. She said that influencing public opinion in this way was typical Lena's tactic. The young lady wondered if there was a way to change public opinion. She knew there had to be something that would attract the public's attention and put her in a better position. Sharon ran up to the young lady and said with a smile that she had been running around looking for her. Sharon said with a smile on her face that she had found the man, and he perfectly matched all the conditions that the young lady had told her earlier. Ethel looked at her lawyer in surprise. She was in shock. The next day, the young lady finally found her trump card. The kingdom of Leok is a small territory, but the country is rich and strong. During a trip to the empire, the ambassador of the kingdom of Leok lost her daughter. She did not return back and stayed there to look for her daughter. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she had no memories of her childhood. She didn't know how she could be the ambassador's daughter. The young lady said it was complete nonsense. As soon as she saw Anna, she had no doubts. Even the name and appearance completely matched the description she read in the original novel. Ethel knew she had done the right thing when she approached her attorney, Sharon. Anna said that, of course, when she looked at the advertisement about the lost child, she wanted to be him, but as she herself saw, she had light brown hair, and the child and the seeker had white. Ethel looked at the young lady with a smile and said that children who were born blonde often had darker hair as they grew older. Ethel smiled and asked Anna to just trust her. She flying out a copy of The Ambassador. Ethel said about this, but she had never seen The Ambassador. Anna sighed heavily and said that she was discovered in the east of the empire, and the ambassador lost her daughter in the south. Ethel was confused and didn't know what to answer for a moment, but after a while they finally arrived at the residence of the ambassador of the kingdom of Leok. Before they could reach the gates, knights blocked their way. Ethel looked at the knights with a smile and said that she would like to get their permission and go through to meet the ambassador. She said that she thought she had found her lost daughter. The knight looked at them and said with a grin, "Did they really find the lost daughter?" He said that the main swindlers came to them. He looked at them and asked if they knew how many people came here with the same words. He said that if they had decided to deceive, they should have at least found an actress with the right hair color, since it was obvious at first glance that this woman was a simple village girl and not the ambassador's daughter. Anna said with tears in her eyes that, as she thought this was not the place she should come to. The young lady looked at the knight and asked if she would show it. Then he would let her through. The knight looked at her in surprise and asked what she was going to show. A moment later, he saw the coat of arms of the Cassius family. The knight was taken aback and asked them to wait a second, as he would immediately bring the ambassador to them. The young lady looked at Anna and smiled and told her not to worry about anything as she was with her. She looked at her puzzled and said that everything was fine. The ambassador ran to the young lady. In a hurry, she said that she was informed that the young lady had arrived from the ducal family. The young lady looked at the ambassador intently. She was very glad that they had come out to her. A moment later, the ambassador was taken aback and Madame was in shock as she could not believe her eyes. The man approached his wife and asked in surprise what was wrong with her. The couple looked at the young lady and asked if she was their daughter Diana. The young lady looked at her parents in bewilderment. Ethel looked at them and said that this was the story of the man who found Miss Anna at the southern resort. She said that the information was mixed up due to a mistake at the shelter, and Miss Anna still thinks that she was found in a completely different place. In a hurry, the young couple ran to their daughter. The lady hugged her daughter and asked her forgiveness for losing her. Ethel knew that Lena was the one who originally found Anna, but that didn't matter now. She looked at the young lady in surprise and asked where she was going. Ethel smiled and said that she was not going anywhere. She just decided to leave them alone for a while. The young lady smiled and said that Ethel had brought her to the estate, and without her help, she would never have met them. The lady thanked the benefactress and their families with a smile. The lady said that she did not even know how to repay her for her kindness. They said they could let her go, just like that. They wanted her to accept an appropriate reward. They said they were ready to give her anything if only she would say what she wanted. The young lady looked at them and said with a smile that if they said so, then she had one small favor to ask of them. A few days later, in the central court of the empire, there was a real furor. Everyone shouted and greeted the Duke's family. Everyone greeted Miss Lena with admiration. Lena, in turn, wished everyone a good day with a smile. As the ducal family passed and walked into the central court, everyone shouted and praised the young ladies. Leheim smiled, looking at his father, and said that when they went home, he would sit in the carriage next to his sister. The Duke smiled and told his son that when he won at rock, paper, scissors, then they would talk. The journalist looked at the young gentleman and asked what his state of mind had been lately, and the young gentleman was asked whether he thought he would win the case. The journalists shouted and called the young gentleman as they wanted him to answer the questions they asked. One of the journalists asked the young gentleman if it was true that his wife had been abused by her parents and was forced to marry him. The young gentleman, in turn, turned around and looked angrily at the journalist who had asked the question. Lena, in turn, came closer to her brother and took his hand. Leandro looked at his sister in surprise as he did not expect her to approach him. Leandro looked at the crowd of journalists and all the people present and said that he wanted to say only one thing. The young gentleman said that he hoped that soon all misunderstandings would be resolved with his beloved wife and they would continue their happy family life. Lena looked at the ladies and gentlemen with a smile and told them to pray that her brother would not face the tragedy of divorce. Everyone present shouted that they would pray. The journalists were a little perplexed as they still had not received an answer to their question. Everyone present was surprised as another carriage arrived at the court. They were at a loss when they saw Ambassador Leoc. They were confused and did not understand what brought the ambassador to the court building. They wondered if there was a diplomatic conflict between the empire and the kingdom. The lady looked at everyone present and said with a smile that she was only here to accompany an important person. She smiled and said that she asked their permission to introduce them to her benefactress and esteemed guest of the Kingdom of Leoc, the young lady Ethel. Ethel smiled, looking at everyone present, and said that her name was Ethel Cassius, although now she was trying with all her might to get rid of the Cassius name. Madame also looked at those present and said that there was one more person whom she would like to introduce to them. She said she wanted to introduce her daughter Diana, who had been lost for 20 years. The journalists were shocked because the ambassador had found her daughter. They were shouting that it was just a sensation. A moment later, they all rushed to her with questions about how she managed to find her daughter. Madame smiled and said that Lady Ethel had found her and that she was the benefactress of their family. Madame said that His Majesty the King was also delighted when he heard the news and officially invited the lady to the kingdom. As the young lady walked into the courtroom accompanied by reporters, she was peppered with questions. They wanted to know how she found the young lady. They asked her what her current mood was. Journalists asked if she intended to abandon the divorce. The young lady looked at them and said that she would reveal all the circumstances of this case at the trial. Ethel, in turn, stared out the window where there was a crowd of people. She sighed heavily and said that this was just a real bazaar near the courthouse. Vinetta walked up to the young lady and told her with a smile not to worry, as they would not allow anyone to enter the courtroom. A moment later, the young lady heard her husband calling her. Ethel was shocked and wondered why he was stalking her again. She didn't want to see him at all. Leandro looked at her with a deep gaze and said that even if she was forced to marry him from now on, he would do everything to make her happy. Ethel sighed heavily and said that if he talked too much, his mouth would hurt. She said that they could continue this conversation in court. The young gentleman asked his wife to spare him a minute and talk to him. Lena approached her brother and said with a smile that she would talk to her sister. The young man looked at his sister in surprise as he did not expect to see her. Lena looked at Ethel and said that she would do everything possible to make her change her mind. Lena looked at her brother and asked him to leave them alone. Leandro sighed heavily, looked at his sister and said that he was counting on her. Ethel was shocked that her husband had left his younger sister to even deal with his divorce. She wondered how stupid he really was. Lena walked up to Ethel, looking at Vinetta. She asked if she could come out. Vinetta said that it was simply impossible since she was the young lady's personal bodyguard. Lena sighed heavily and said that it seemed that she had a very loyal knight. Lena looked at her daughter-in-law and told her to order the knight to come out herself. Ethel noticed that there was a different atmosphere around Lena, but she still couldn't tell with her precision what it was. The young lady looked at her bodykeeper and asked her to leave the room for a while. A moment later, they were alone. Lena grabbed Ethel's hand. Ethel was shocked as she didn't expect this. Lena looked at the young lady and said that she heard from her brother that the Valley's family treated her cruelly. Lena looked at Ethel with a pitiful look and said that it seemed that she had had a very hard time. Ethel was stunned by the actions of the young lady. Lena looked at the young lady with tears in her eyes and said that she understood her feelings perfectly because she had once been in an orphanage. Lena said with tears in her eyes that the director bullied her. Very often she said that he was a very bad person, and from time to time he starved her and also beat her. Ethel knew perfectly well that the young lady had told on the nasty bastard, so that he would be punished. Lena told the young lady that she seemed to know what was gnawing at her heart. Looking at the young lady, she said that she would help her take revenge on the Valley's family. Ethel was shocked by what she heard. She did not answer. Lena looked at the young lady and said with a smirk that revenge was a given, but she would also make sure that her brother treated her well. Lena asked Ethel to withdraw the divorce suit. The young lady knew that if she were the real Ethel, she would have accepted the offer without hesitation. She knew that the main character had both the strength and the ability to take a good revenge. In the original work, Tara's revenge was successful only thanks to the main character. Lena said that the people from the Valley's family were expelled. Now none of them would be able to even make a saga beyond the threshold of their mansion. Ethel knew that the young lady's words about help were definitely sincere, but she is not Tara, and not the real Ethel. She looked at her and said that she appreciated her desire to help, but she did not want to take revenge on anyone. Ethel looked at Lena and said that if she wanted to do something for her, then it would be better if she helped with the divorce. Lena looked at the young lady and asked in a trembling voice why she did not want to take revenge. She said that her offenders were bad people, which meant they should be punished. Ethel pulled back from the young lady and looked at her sideways, saying that everyone had different values in life. Lena, looking down, said that she thought it was time to stop and give up. Lena said that since her brother had fully realized his mistakes, other family members had also realized their mistakes, and now they would have to pay more attention to her. The young lady sighed heavily and said that for this reason she simply needed a divorce from them, and that's all. Lena said with fury that the court is not a simple thing. Lena screamed that all her life people would whisper about her. The young lady looked at her sister and said that she could convince both her father and brother, but she should still stop all this. She said that the young lady would only hurt her feelings if she returned to her family. Ethel saw that they still thought that she was begging for attention and affection, and that the divorce proceedings were merely a means to that end. Lena looked at the young lady and said with a fake smile that she still loved the young master. Ethel knew that no matter how much she repeated the words, they did not work in this situation, and Lena did not see her as an equal at all. Thanks to this, she realized everything that was happening. Ethel looked hard at the young lady and said that she did not like her brother and she had never felt that way about him. Lena froze in shock from what she heard, as she did not expect such a thing. It was true that she had no sympathy for the young master, because he was the first acquaintance she met in the unfamiliar world he pulled her out of the hell called the Valley's family. But looking back, she realized that she just wanted to become one family with him and did not love him at all. Ethel said the marriage was loveless from the start. The young lady said in a trembling voice that there were many spouses in the world who lived together without love. Ethel said that she was an outsider in their family. Lena apologized to the young lady and said that everyone just doesn't know how to express their feelings, but they won't do that again. In the future, the young lady said that there is no way back. This trial will sever her connection with their family, and the relationship with them will also end. Lena was shocked by what she heard. She said that they were friends. Ethel said that she had said that Lena before, but she didn't like it, and they weren't friends with her. Lena shouted furiously that it was all a lie. Ethel said that their conversation was over. Lena ran up to her daughter-in-law and told her to wait for her as she was too harsh. Vanetta caught the young lady, but she in turn continued to scream and call Ethel. Ethel, for her part, was puzzled. She genuinely liked the characters in the novella she had read. Lena screamed very loudly with rage and called the young lady. Ethel recoiled as she did not expect her to scream like that. Lena asked the young lady why she was pretending not to know who she was doing all this for. Lena screamed that she was doing everything for her. Lena screamed that she was going to live in a harsh world, coming out of under the care of the Cassius family. The young lady looked at her and told her to be careful with her words. Lena's eyes fell, and she looked at the young lady in bewilderment. Lena sighed heavily and said that she had made a mistake. She looked at Ethel and said that she herself had been harsh with her. Ethel looked at her in surprise and asked what she meant when she said that she was doing everything for her. Lena. If she received the protection of her family, then her life would be calm and safe. Ethel knew it sounded like an excuse, but it didn't seem to her like that was the meaning behind the words. Lena's expression changed in an instant, and she said with a smile that they had been talking for too long and that they could see each other later. Vinette looked at the young mistress and asked if she should grab the young lady. Ethel told her that she shouldn't do that as they could be at a disadvantage if they used physical force. Ethel was confused because Lena did not look like the one Ethel knew before. Ethel thought for a moment and decided to put aside thoughts of the young lady. She wondered how much she knew the young lady at all. She had read the original novel, which was similar to the biography of the young lady many times, but she still wondered if she could say that she knew the real her, thinking that it was all because of the excessive love of others for her. Ethel in turn wondered what kind of person Lena was. Lena sighed heavily as she gave in to her emotions, which was not like her at all. She knew she needed to calm down. Entering the room, she smiled and said that she had come. Leandro ran to his sister and called her. Lena knew that in any case this divorce was impossible. Leandro looked at his sister and asked if they had had a good talk. The young lady in turn only sighed heavily and said nothing. The young man understood her without words. The Duke told his daughter that she should not have cared for such an ungrateful man. Lena looked at her father and said that they had treated her daughter-in-law badly. The Duke looked at her in surprise and asked in what sense they had treated her badly. He said that she had started whining only because they had not paid her due attention. The Duke sighed heavily and said that she was not a child at all. The Duke looked at his son and asked why he was making such a fuss about the divorce, and he also asked why he was forcing his sister to listen to such unpleasant conversations. The young lady smiled and told her father that it was not so, and she herself intervened as she wanted to bring her daughter-in-law back to the house. The Duke looked at her and said that her problem was that she was too kind. The young lady smiled and said that they would definitely win the trial. She smiled and asked if they wanted to have dinner with the whole family after the hearing was over. Grozog and Leheim looked at the young lady intently but said nothing. The young lady looked at her brother and asked what was wrong with them. The young man said that she must not have heard because she was talking to her daughter-in-law. He said that things had taken a strange turn and she should read this article. The young lady looked at the article in surprise and asked what it was about. A moment later, she asked if there were any difficulties. The young lady saw the headline of the article about the ambassador's daughter returning home and was shocked by what she read. Leheim looked at his sister and said that they say that the daughter-in-law even arrived here on the carriage of the ambassador of the kingdom. Looking at his sister, he said that they didn't know anything because they were the first to enter the courthouse. He said that it looked like she made a lot of noise. The young lady read that Anna had suffered for a long time from a cruel husband and prayed every day for a divorce, but unfortunately it was impossible since the law was not on her side. The point is that they hope that they will create a society that will not sacrifice the people of the world. Leheim was furious. He did not understand why at such an important moment their daughter-in-law found the ambassador's lost daughter. Leandro looked at his brother and sighed heavily, saying that they considered her a benefactor who had reunited their family, but he was furious and did not understand why they interfered in the affairs of another house. The lady was shocked that they had indirectly expressed support for Ethel's divorce. She knew that if they made the slightest mistake, their mouths would be blackened and they would appear to everyone as villains who had put pressure on their victims. The young lady threw the paper down and said that they shouldn't worry too much. She said that there was no reason why they could lose, even if there were a few voices supporting the other side. The young lady looked at her brother and said that his only fault was the huge amount of work. Lena said that for this reason, he could not devote time to his wife. Leandro looked at his sister and said that everything was correct. The young lady said that her daughter-in-law took the maid from the castle with her, and one can guess how everything will turn out, that their efforts are worthy of praise. Leheim looked at his brother and said that there was something else. He said that the jewels that were given to him were swept clean after winning the auction. The young lady said that was correct, and the housekeeper said that she saw the green princess in the jewelry store a few days ago. Leheim sighed heavily and said that their daughter-in-law was quite the villain. He said that she was selling the jewelry she had been given to raise money for the divorce, and an odd atmosphere filled the room. The young lady in turn was puzzled. She wondered how she managed to find the ambassador's daughter. Lena had made inquiries earlier, but only found out the name and place of residence. Lena knew why the young lady found the one she could not find, but Lena even had an information article and family connections. She knew that it was not just a coincidence that her daughter had been found just before the divorce hearing. She wondered if it was really a coincidence. She wondered if the young lady had also returned to the past. The young man looked at his sister and asked if she was okay, as her expression was very frightening. The young lady's expression changed instantly, and she asked with a smile what was wrong with her expression. She smiled a coquettish smile and said that she was just curious how the young lady managed to find the ambassador's daughter. The young man said that his daughter-in-law's lawyer specialized in divorce cases, and they must have met in the reception room. His daughter-in-law thought that the girl looked very much like the ambassador. Lena looked at her brother and asked if her daughter-in-law had ever met the ambassador. The young man hesitated and said that he was not sure. The young lady shouted angrily at her brother and asked him if he really knew anything about his wife. The young man looked at the young lady in surprise. Lena looked at her brother. She realized that she had made a huge mistake. She asked for forgiveness and said that she had been a little tired lately. The young man thought for a moment and said that perhaps they had seen each other in passing when they came to the capital for family gatherings. He said that his wife often walked alone. Lena thought that it was all in vain that she had worked herself up so much, since regression is not something that is encountered at every step. She still hadn't seen any sign that the young lady remembered her past life, and it didn't look like she was blessed by the goddess either. Sometime later, looking at the clock, they realized that it was already approaching the time before the hearing. The young lady knew that one way or another, now she needed to focus on the court. The young lady in turn sighed heavily. She was very worried about the upcoming trial. Sharon was puzzled and said that she could do it and that she could handle everything. Ethel thought she was right. Her lawyer was participating in a trial for the first time with so many spectators. Terence said that under pressure from the emperor, people who had friendly ties with the Duke's family were thrown out of the courtroom, and people who were in conflict with the Duke's family were chosen as judges. But the reason for the imperial family's help was the Duke's family's dirty games, not her divorce. She knew that she was hoping for a lot of help, but she shouldn't, because there was a bigger problem right now. The Marquis looked at the young lady and asked with a smile if he could come in. The Marquis looked at her and said that there were a lot of people here, so he mingled with the crowd and walked towards them unnoticed. She looked at him in surprise and said that he had other things to do. The Marquis smiled and said that he had already finished everything he said, that he had tried to sort everything out as quickly as possible in order to listen to this trial. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked if he was on the jury. The Marquis smiled and said that there were attacks since he had previously applied and it had been approved. He smiled and said that he must have been lucky. She smiled and asked in surprise if he had really been lucky. The Marquis smiled and said that he would like to give her a gift. The young lady was surprised to see the chocolate. She said she heard it was hard to get. He looked at her and asked if she wasn't going to put up a fierce fight. He said he hoped the gift would give her strength. The young lady looked at her colleagues and told them to all quickly eat one. They looked at her in surprise and asked if they could really eat something so valuable. The Marquis smiled and said that of course they could do that. A moment later, he presented them with several more boxes of the delicious delicacy. The Marquis looked at the young lady intently and with surprise and said that the man was nowhere to be seen. She was puzzled and said that it was so. A moment later, a young man entered their room and said that they were in trouble. He said that the butler was captured by the Cassius family's men. The young people froze in shock. Robbie said he contacted the butler last night about the attack Joshua had suffered. The young man said that it turned out that someone had found out about his whereabouts and grabbed him right at the moment when he was leaving the house to appear in court. The young lady was furious because she knew that in order to win, they needed the butler to testify in court. She was confused and did not know what to do. She wondered if they could hold the trial without him. The young lady realized that they didn't even know if it was possible. The young lady looked at her lawyer and asked if she could move the butler's turn to give evidence. Sharon said with a smile that of course she could do that, and it would not be difficult. The young lady looked at Laura and asked if she could stretch out her testimony as long as possible. Laura smiled and said she would do anything. The Marquis looked at the young lady and said with a smile that he would find the master butler. Ethel was surprised as she did not expect to hear such a thing from the Marquis. She looked at him and asked him in surprise if he would mind doing it. He smiled and said that he didn't think it would be difficult, of course if he wasn't locked in the Duke's mansion. The Marquis said that he would use Jack as bait and he would slip away. Jack looked at the gentleman in surprise. He was stunned. The Marquis looked at the young lady and said with a smile that she had nothing to worry about, as he would arrive on time and her efforts would not be in vain. Sharon looked at the young lady and said that it was time for them to go. Laura walked up to the young lady and called her. Ethel looked at her and smiled and said that everything would be fine and she had nothing to worry about. She looked at everyone and said with a smile that it was time for them to go to court. She knew that she could trust the rescue of her butler to her Marquise. She knew that she had to do everything possible on this battlefield. Sometime later, the young lady entered the second hall of the Central Court of the Empire. Everyone was whispering because they saw the Duke's family. They said that their family was full of only handsome men. The ladies also discussed the rumor that the Duchess had recently been hit by her own mother, a fact they were surprised and puzzled by. They also discussed that the young master himself brought her there. The young men felt very sorry for the young lady. They were sorry that something like this happened to such a good person. The young lady smiled in turn as the atmosphere was favorable to her, as she hoped rumors quickly spread among the people. Ethel thought that Lena must be very puzzled by what was happening. Ethel knew that the young lady was currently racking her brains thinking about how she had found and saved the ambassador's daughter. Ethel was glad that the young lady had filled her head with entirely different thoughts, as she would now worry less about her beloved brother's divorce. A moment later, the judges began the divorce trial and asked the plaintiff to read the charges. Sharon addressed the honorable judges. She said that the plaintiff and the defendant had entered into marriage 2 years ago. According to the imperial calendar, in the presence of their chief goddess, they had vowed to do their best for each other. She said that, however, the defendant ignored the plaintiff's desire to be together, avoided attempts to continue a normal family life under the pretext of employment, and also neglected the situation where the plaintiff was being treated unfairly at home, although he knew about it. She said that in addition, he consistently used false excuses to express his sincere remorse and often engaged in threatening behavior such as inquiring about the plaintiff's background and stalking the plaintiff, causing him to feel anxious. She said that based on this, the plaintiff demands a divorce. She said that, however, the plaintiff was ready to make concessions, demanding only a quick divorce without any compensation or division of property. At him in surprise, the plaintiff and asked if it was true. The young lady looked at the judge with a hard look and said that it was all true and that she was only interested in the divorce itself. Some might think that she was filing for divorce in order to take the Duke's property for herself, but sadly, for the sake of a greater goal, one has to give up small things. After all, compared to the money that will come from the abandoned mine, the compensation is a pittance. The Cassius's general counsel, Farrell, told the court that the defendant was being treated unfairly, whether the defendant, as the plaintiff claimed, was either a misunderstanding arising from a difference in perception or an unavoidable situation arising from unavoidable circumstances. He said that almost immediately after the wedding, the defendant took over the management of the family territory on behalf of his father. Despite the fact that he was so busy that he could not even eat on time due to his heavy workload, the accused tried to keep his family together. He gave his wife a large sum of money as pocket money and gave her expensive things as gifts. He also supported his wife's family members who were experiencing financial difficulties. The lawyer said it was true that the couple did not have enough time to spend together, and he asked to understand, as a busy man like himself, that work took up too much of his time. The lawyer said that unfortunately the plaintiff had made unreasonable demands for unconditional time without taking into account the defendant's circumstances and had repeatedly ignored his family and staff. The young lady in turn was shocked by this statement. She did not understand when she did something like that. The lawyer said that the plaintiff also made harsh insults towards the defendant's family only because the defendant momentarily forgot about their wedding anniversary. The lawyer said that even so, the defendant had always been on his wife's side and still loved her. Lena watched everything that was happening with a grin. The lawyer, looking at the court, said that his client could not accept the divorce under any circumstances. The young gentleman said that no matter how busy he was, he should not have left his wife alone. He said that in the future he promised to devote more time to her. He looked at his wife and said that he was asking her to call off the divorce. The young lady was shocked. She wondered if he had studied acting from his sister. The young ladies whispered that the young man really loved his wife. The young lady looked at him intently and said that it was all funny cheese on his part. She asked if he was saying that he loved her while making a show of himself as a victim. She looked at him and said that even if he really loved her, she would still divorce him. The young man was taken aback as he did not expect to hear such a thing. He couldn't say that he didn't want a divorce because of her minds and because he was afraid of breaking the alliance with her family, so now he's trying to turn the situation around and make her guilty. She was furious that he was now saying that he loved her. The young lady wondered what he was even thinking. The judge looked at everyone present and said that the main issue in this case seemed to be whether the defendant's actions were grounds for divorce in court. The judge said that if they had any evidence they needed to present it and speak out. Sharon said that you as a witness, she would like to call Laura a maid who worked in the castle. The lawyer said he objected because Laura was a maid brought by the plaintiff from his parents' home, and there was a high probability that her testimony would be prejudiced. Sharon said Laura was a maid the family hired just a month before the wedding. And besides, her salary was paid by the Duke, and at present she has no significant connection with the Valley's family. The lawyer said that the maid had recently been fired from her job at the ducal castle and had reasons to be biased. Sharon said that this was speculation, since the head maid who fired her admitted that she was fired for nothing, and even apologized, and the matter was resolved peacefully between the parties. The judge thought for a moment and said he didn't think there was a good reason for the maid not to testify. The judge said they would accept the plaintiff's motion, and they could call a witness. Sharon looked at the maid and asked if she had helped her client more than anyone else in the last 2 years, whether that was true or not. She asked to tell what the relationship between the Duke and Duchess was like. The young lady said that she really had nothing much to say, as the Duke did not visit the Duchess often, and they had even lived in different rooms since their marriage. Except for some rare events, they also hardly had days when they didn't even meet in the mansion. Sharon looked at the witness and asked if it could be said that they met no more than 2 or 3 times a week. Laura said that this was exactly the case, but that was only at the beginning of the marriage. After 6 months, the meetings became no more than twice a month. Sharon asked if one of these meetings must have been the day of the trip to the capital for the Duke's family reunion. The witness said that was correct, and she was sure that if it had not been for such meetings, the Duke and Duchess would not have met for months. The lawyer said that he objected because there are cases where couples of days can meet frequently due to special circumstances. The court looked at the lawyer and told him to refrain from talking during the interrogation, except in cases of important refutation. Sharon looked at Laurel and said that she had said earlier that at the beginning of their marriage they met 2 or 3 times a week. She asked if their relationship was better then compared to now. Laura said that this was not the case at all. Even then their relationship was cold, so the young lady tried her best to get closer to the Duke. But he in turn always found a reason to refuse her. Laura said that she once saw a young lady crying while standing in front of the young Duke's office. The young lady in turn knew that she had actually just yawned, and now her pride was very hurt by the fact that she was considered a person who was obsessed with her husband, but she knew that she could not do anything about it. Sharon looked at the witness and asked if she thought the Duke was really busy. Laura said that of course he didn't look particularly free, but she couldn't tell that he was that busy. Laura said that even when he was just relaxing in his room, he never called his wife, and when she came to him and invited him for tea, he immediately went out for a walk. Laura said she had nothing more to say. Everyone present was in shock. They did not understand why he married the young lady at all. Ethel glanced sideways at Lena. She knew that since the young master's image was good, the influence was also great. The lawyer said they would also like to ask some questions of their witness. The lawyer said that Laura said that the young Duke had gone out for a walk when the lady invited him to tea. He asked when it had happened. Laura said that considering that it was spring, it had happened about this time last year. The lawyer said it looked like it was late spring. He said that if you think about it late, in the spring, there is a festival on the family's property in part of little Leanna's birthday. The lawyer looked at the witness in surprise and asked if she remembered that festival last year. Laura said with surprise that she remembered it. Sharon said she objected because the issue had absolutely no bearing on the trial. The lawyer said it did. The court told them to calm down and listen to the defendant's arguments. Leanna's birthday last year, Laura said that she remembered. The lawyer said that they say that the Duke feeds his staff different special dishes at every festival. She said that was true. He looked at her and asked what the special dish was that day. Ethel was shocked because she knew the festival was held twice a month, and she wondered how anyone could remember anything specific. Laura hesitated as if she didn't know what to answer. Sharon asked angrily what festival food had to do with the meeting. The lawyer said it might not seem directly relevant, but he asked the question to show how imprecise human memory is. Sharon looked at him furiously and asked if he really thought their witness's testimony was inaccurate. He said that there was a possibility, so they just had to keep that in mind. Plus, the events happened around the same time. The witness does not remember this. Sharon said that this was not an argument since the work of the servants was different every time because the official festivals of the Duke's family were held more than 40 times a year. Everyone present was surprised by such a figure. The lawyer grinned and said that she was right, and the work was indeed different, but that also meant that mistakes could be made if one only listened to the words of the witness, who was a maid. The lawyer said that the fact that the young Duke had a lot of free time was ultimately just a subjective judgment of the witness. Laura was in shock. She screamed that it was not a lie. The lawyer asked if the testimony was true that the young Duke had rejected his wife's request. Even when he had free time, Lena enjoyed the performance. The lawyer asked whether the maid who was the mistress's personal maid could have been fully aware of the young Duke's affairs. The young lady watched the lawyer closely. She knew that he was not so simple since with a few words he had created doubts in the testimony of her maid. But even if that was the case, they still have something to say about her husband's busy schedule. Sharon addressed the court and told them to pay attention to the schedule of regular reports. She provided a report about business trips once a month for about a week. The judge thought for a moment and said that the schedule was indeed tight, but the details were vague. The lawyer said the business trip was an important opportunity to report to the Duke on the state of his territory. Sharon said that even a direct train would take him from Ashton to the capital in 4 days. She asked if he really wanted to say that he had no time for his wife but was constantly traveling. Sharon said that this was the evidence they had prepared to get an accurate answer from the defendant. Sharon said that the young master had attended the Count's banquet with the princess, and a month earlier had gone on a long family trip with his father, sister, and brother. She said that the young Duke must have always been busy. She said that in order to find time to spend with her family in the capital and to do her work, she had to do it while on the estate. Sharon looked at the defendant and asked if he acknowledged this fact. The lawyer looked at the judge and said he acknowledged that the defendant had a special family relationship. The lawyer said that this is not a reason for divorce between the defendant and the plaintiff. He said the defendant and his family had repeatedly asked the plaintiff to join them. The lawyer said that although it was the plaintiff who rejected their requests, the young lady was shocked by this statement. The lawyer said that it could be said that both partners were equally guilty in their different relationships. Sharon, in her fury, asked if he really meant to say that it was the plaintiff's fault. She asked if it made sense to see her relatives so often from the very beginning of their marriage. The judges whispered among themselves because this case was really not so simple. The lawyer said that the young Duke did not know how to treat his wife. He asked if it was possible to become a good husband simply by marrying someone. The lawyer said that the gentleman had no experience of communicating with the opposite sex before the wedding. The lawyer said that this was why he tried to avoid his wife when they were alone and spend more time with his family. The young lady was furious because the lawyer wanted to make him out to be a regretful man who realized love only after his wife left. Sharon said with her fury that if there was any point in avoiding his wife just because he didn't know how to treat her, the lawyer said that the young Duke had also thought a lot about this. The young lady saw that they were trying to gain sympathy by making the most of known facts, just as Lena had used her vulnerability as a commoner, an orphan, to create an image of pity. Ethel was sure that it was the young lady who had planned all this. Now she realized that she was dealing directly with Lena. Sharon Power, why didn't he change anything, no matter how many times his wife asked him to? The lawyer said that he was going to change but didn't have time because the plaintiff filed for divorce so suddenly. A moment later, the court called for a short recess, telling everyone to prepare the witnesses they planned to call. The lawyer said they were calling the Duke's head maid as a witness. The young lady sighed heavily. She knew that they only had a 40-minute break, but it would be nice if it was 2 hours. Sharon in turn said that it was still better than being in the general without a break. The young man looked at the lady and said, puzzled, that the Marquis had not returned yet. The young lady was shocked, as she did not expect to hear such a thing. But she still hoped that they would be safe. The butler shouted angrily at the knight that he had said that he would meet the Duke himself and explained to him the reason for his departure. The butler asked why everything had to be done this way. The knight said that the Duke was now at the court of the master's cabin boy. The butler looked at him and said that he knew, and for that reason was heading straight there. The butler knew that he had to pretend now that he was going there to see the Duke, and not as a witness. The knight looked closely at the butler and said that they were ordered to take him to the main house. The butler asked, puzzled, who had given them the order, and he said that he had served the Duke for decades and knew his character well. The butler said that the Duke was not in favor of waiting until the end of the trial to deal with him. The butler looked at the knight and asked if Lena had ordered them to bring him. The butler looked at the knight intently and said that if you think about it, it was the young lady who brought him into the family. The knight said that the lady's order was equal to the Duke's order and vice versa. The butler shouted angrily to the knight that his master was indeed the Duke. The knight said that the butler might think so. The knight asked if the butler thought that if the Duke found out about this, he would punish him. The butler sighed heavily as he understood everything he said, that the word about the main house was a lie to the Cassiuses until now, and he wondered why he should not live out the rest of his life like his father. The butler simply wanted to repay his debt to the lady who made him realize his own stupidity. A moment later, there was a crash in the carriage, and the knight looked in surprise at the window, which was broken. Everyone looked at the young man in surprise and asked who he was. They did not expect this and were not ready for the attack. The Marquis looked at them and said with a grin that he was simply a warrior of justice. A moment later, the Marquis and his butler were riding on horseback to the court. The butler looked at the Marquis in surprise and asked if the knights were really dead. The Marquis smiled and said that this was not the case at all, since killing them would only make the situation worse. The butler asked the Marquis in surprise how he knew where he was. The Marquis said that he knew his location with the help of a mark. In other words, he attached a piece of his power to the butler. The butler asked in surprise when he had managed to do this. The Marquis said that a few days ago, in front of the lawyer's office during their last meeting, the butler looked at the Marquis in surprise and asked if he knew that something like this would happen. The Marquis smiled and said that, like his mistress, he did not have a very good character, so he was suspicious of everyone. The butler said that it seemed he was afraid that he would change his mind, so the way to track him down, the Marquis apologized for this insult. The butler said that it was fine, since in the end, thanks to this, he was able to find him. The Marquis said that the young lady did not know this. The butler asked if they would be able to get to court on time. The Marquis said he was not sure, but would do his best. The butler looked at the Marquis in surprise and asked in bewilderment if everything was all right with him since he was sweating profusely. The Marquis said that it was because his tracking was very wide. He said that this often happens after using power, so he doesn't need to worry about it. The Marquis smiled and said that he also had holy water given by the goddess of victory herself. The Marquis and the butler rushed forward in a hurry without looking back. Sometime later, the judge asked everyone to take their seats as he resumed the trial, saying that he was calling a defense witness. The lawyer approached Madame and said that she was the Duke's senior maid and the chief manager of his employees. He asked if this was true. Madame said that everything was correct. She looked intently at the lawyer. The lawyer asked her as a representative of the servants whether she could tell how the marriage between the plaintiff and the defendant had developed in recent years. Madame sighed heavily and said that she did not dare to talk about it. The lawyer said, "Madam, that now it is extremely important to prevent the tragedy of the breakup of the family." The young lady looked at Madame intently, for she was a very good actress. Madame said that the young Duchess was a good person, but she never took their side, always refused the gifts they prepared, and did not attend the banquets they gave. Madame said that perhaps they were too modest for her. Ethel knew that on the one hand Madame was not lying, but she was not telling the whole truth either. They gave her gifts, but were they portraits of Lena? And the banquets in turn took place in Lena's fan cafe. The servants praised Lena. Madame said that it was true that the young Duke was passive, so they always felt sorry for him. The lawyer looked at her in surprise, asked why Madame said that once he called her personally and asked her to take care of the young lady. Ethel found it funny hearing how Madame romanticized the story, how he just dumped all his work on her. Madame said that the young Duke always spent his time immersed in work, while the Duchess in turn usually sat in her room, although sometimes she went to book clubs or shopping. Everyone was whispering that the young Duke worked a lot, and his wife did nothing but go shopping. The young lady in turn thanked the maid for saying exactly what she needed. Sharon looked at Madame and said that she had mentioned the plaintiff's lifestyle, but as a housewife looking after a large family, could her life be so idle? The head maid said that she had not been assigned the duties of mistress to my lady. The lawyer asked in surprise why this was so. She asked if the young lady should not be the mistress of the castle in which the young Duke is his father's representative. Madame said that the young lady was not accustomed to running such a large household.